1 second, child. Sorry. One second. Alright, I'm starting straight.
Really ask yourself what or who.
Yeah.
A portion of today.
I think we watched this one, but I don't remember it. So we're gonna watch it again. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 1, 2. 3. Oh, look at that. Oh, wait a minute. Oh no, we're not up here yet. We're not up here yet. We're way back. Oh my god. Oh my god, we're back here. Yeah, this is not the finale. Let me change the name.
Want to trade Bitcoin, plus oil, plus gold, plus S&P 500, plus...
That's what I don't remember.
At this point, we've solved every lingering mystery from Security Breach. We looked at this thing from top to bottom. Glamrock Freddy, Golden Freddy, the missing Bonnie, the infuriating Patient 46. We can...
Let me go check real quick. No, it's not the finale today. Not the finale today, guys.
Connected every detail, we called every child a robot. And that's where I was happy to leave it. FNAF dead and buried once more. Except for that time I talked about the potential real-life ARG, but we're just gonna ignore that ever happened. But now, it's reborn yet again, risen from the ashes. With the drop of a brand new DLC teaser a month ago, and the start of a brand new book series literally this week, FNAF is back. Which means, it's time I dive back in and cover the one thing that I was too scared to talk about when I was doing theories earlier this year. It's the one topic that very few have spoken about because it's just so darn confusing. I appreciate that probably doesn't narrow it down a whole bunch because let's face it, most of this game's lore feels that way, but this was on a whole separate level. Fred boys and manga girls, it's time to talk about the Blob. Hello, Internet. Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's full of so much agony from analyzing FNAF, it could probably bring its own animatronic to life. Maybe then I'd finally get a vacation. Soon, my precious. Soon. So, you heard the cold open. There's a new FNAF book. There's a new FNAF teaser. But before I get to any of that, there's one topic that all of us left lingering from Security Breach. Everyone's favorite massive animatronic parts and black tentacles, the Blob. Or, as I like to call him, Freddy Spaghetti. On that note, by the way, I don't know if you're aware, but FNAF is in the process of becoming a real pizza place. Not real. Basically, they're doing the same ghost kitchen stuff that Mr. Beast did for his food company, where existing restaurants just make extra food under a different brand. I actually did a food theory explaining it all. Check it out after the video. It's actually really fascinating stuff and very relevant to the franchise now. Anyway, with a real-life Freddy's comes the need for some
I already been watching it. Already watched it.
There is nothing like a Wendy's Frosty.
Shut up, Wendy's. You guys don't get to hear what the Wendy said.
But look a little closer. There are mysterious red eyes up middle. Try to go down that hole on your own, and you're immediately jump scared by the face of Funtime Freddy attached to a big oily tentacle. But hop into Glamrock Freddy and he protects you, saying that his and if Freddy's Spaghetti is not an item on that menu, so help me, I will write a politely worded letter to their social media account and kindly request that they reconsider. Anyway, the Blob was, at the time, the mystery that no one could crack.
Then you've got the Blob as well. The Blob's just on another level of complicated.
With the Blob, there are so many animatronic bodies there that have no reason to be there. I'm gonna take a stab in the dark. I think I put Henry in the Blob.
The Blob is just a catch-all, all loose ends.
And anything we don't understand, it's in there. It's in the Blob.
But you know what? It's been half a year. I'm done just throwing all our unanswered questions into this literal landfill of a character. Today we're getting some definitive answers as to what and who this thing might actually be. Those answers are gonna do two things for us. One, they'll absolutely help clarify how we talk about this franchise moving forward, and two, they'll certainly have severe implications for the Ruin DLC that's coming out early next year. So in the event that you repress this game, and specifically this character in your memory like I did, here's the quickest of reminders. In Security Breach, if you stay past 6 AM and defeat all the other animatronics, you're able to descend down into the basement of the Pizzaplex. It's there that you discover the remains of the FNAF 6 restaurant with a big ol' hole in the middle. Try to go down that hole on your own, and you're immediately jump scared by the face of Funtime Freddy attached to a big oily tentacle. But hop into Glamrock Freddy and he protects you, saying that his friends are here and that they're angry and confused. Then, during the Afton fight, those same oily tentacles pop in from the vents, trying to capture you, or anyone, to be honest. Burn Afton enough times and you get the final cutscene where the Blob returns to drag Afton off into the ceiling to keep him in cold storage until the next game. And because this is one of only a handful of animated cutscenes in Security Breach, everyone assumes that this is the true canon ending of the game. So figuring out what this thing is meant to be must be pretty darn important, right? So I guess it's time for me to stop stalling and start theorizing. The best place to start is to understand what exactly this thing's made out of, because really, it's a who's who of FNAF history. Obviously, we see Funtime Freddy as its main face. As you're descending down through the hole, though, you can definitely make out FNAF 1's Chica. The shape of the head and the torso are a dead giveaway here. Peeking out is also FNAF 1's Bonnie. Notice the coloring of it and the lack of rosy cheeks. We also have a few random arms and legs popping out. These all match the style of FNAF 1 animatronics. Notice the 3 toes on the feet and the 3 fingers and thumb with no joints on the fingers of the hands. And that's about all that you can make out from just looking at this thing in the game. But if you extract the in-game model and look at all the other sides, you find that there's a lot more hidden here. Mangle is hanging out directly opposite Freddy's face, and if you look closely, you can also find its ribcage, arm, and 2 of its feet hanging out elsewhere. Low on one side of the blob is the puppet's mask, except it's missing one major detail. The iconic tears are gone. That is a huge clue that we're gonna need to address. And finally, we have Circus Baby's mask, the only one of the animatronics to not have her eyes lit up. Again, that is a huge detail that has to be important to this thing in some way. Baby's arm is also hanging.
But like, here's the thing. You say this is the only animatronic, but I know the puppet's not really an animatronic, but its eyes aren't even glowing.
The iconic detail that has to be important to this thing in some way. Baby's arm is also hanging around inside this thing. We know it's definitely Baby's and not Funtime Freddy's because Baby's hands have rounded silver tips on the fingers, just like we see here. Like I said, it is a real mishmash of animatronics. It's almost like Steel Wool wanted a one-stop shop for FNAF's greatest hits. And weird details like Baby's eyes being extinguished and the puppet's missing tears feel like the game trying to tell us something, but what? Well, after identifying each and every arm and leg sticking out of this thing, there was still one animatronic in the spaghetti that really got my MatPat tingle going. This guy right here. Hidden away at the very bottom of the mess is a naked endoskeleton consisting of a single animatronic head, 2 arms, and a missing eye, with a body position that looks like it's desperately trying to pull itself out. His position right at the bottom also felt like he was intentionally hidden, the kind of thing that you would overlook a few times, but clearly he's meant to be important. He's the only animatronic in this mess that's missing an eye, but his other eye is illuminated, which immediately puts him on the same level as the more iconic characters that we see absorbed into this bizarre amalgamation. So, who is it? What is it? Just a random endoskeleton? No, couldn't be. But to know for sure, I had to look closer. My first instinct was that it must be Golden Freddy. I mean, looking at the roster of characters inside the blob, pretty much every major animatronic is represented in some way. Freddy, Bon.
There's too many videos. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24.
Honey, Chica, Foxy, Puppet, Baby, all of them are here, but Golden Freddy is strangely absent. Plus, with animatronic only having one eye, I thought that maybe it was discreetly hinting at the fact that while the crying child's spirit was released in the good ending of FNAF 3, another spirit remained trapped in the metal. Cassidy, the vengeful spirit, still here and still angry. It felt very reminiscent of the two endings of FNAF 3. In case you don't recall, FNAF 3 was the first game in the series to introduce a good and bad ending. Finding all the secret minigames led you to Happiest Day, where the souls of the dead kids are put to rest and we're given a final image of unlit animatronic heads. But if you just finish the game normally, you instead get this, the bad ending. An image of those exact same masks, but each one with one eye lit up. A spirit remains in each body. Well, all of them except for Golden Freddy's mask in the background, which has 2 eyes lit. 2 eyes for 2 spirits, and in the intervening years, one has been released. However, despite lots of pieces thematically lining up, there was one glaring issue here. Golden Freddy doesn't have himself an endoskeleton. He's a spring-lock suit. It's why Golden Freddy is always hunched over. He has no skeleton, no frame. So if Golden Freddy's now off the table, who else could it be? Well, obviously his defining feature is that one lit eye. But it's not only that one eye is lit, it's that he's physically missing the second eye. So I sat down and went through my mind's encyclopedia of FNAF lore to remember what other characters only have one eye. Immediately I thought Foxy might make a good contender, except Foxy isn't actually missing an eye. He just has one covered up by an eye patch. Same thing for Withered Foxy. Maybe it could be Lefty, the strange black animatronic bear from FNAF 6 that was designed as a capture suit for the puppet. Nope, the eye that's missing is on the wrong side. You know what? Forget it. Maybe it is just a random endoskeleton because why not? It's Security Breach. But you know what? It's not that either. You see, FNAF 1 endoskeletons are canonically more boxy and streamlined, not this guy. The body in the blob is actually closer to the Endo 02 models that we see used in FNAF 2. Those have thin spring-like coils around their main skeleton. But even then, what we see in the blob is different. Notice the thick round discs that are directly connected to the skeletal structure. You don't see that in Endo 02s. It's almost like these things' arms are actually its legs. But that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, or does it? Because there is one animatronic that actually has hands connecting to leg joints. One with an Endo 02 head that's missing its right eye. One with wires hanging out the side and with 4 rounded fingers at the end of each hand. It is the Mangle.
Oh,
just,
shit,
you know, it's
right.
Mangle's other head. That weird guy who's just kind of hanging out over there on the body.
Yeah,
it is a
which is very
direct
cool.
match. Okay, gotta be honest with you. I was excited to identify this mystery animatronic, but also, yeah, disappointed. This weird animatronic that's trying to pull itself out of the bottom of the blob feels like it should mean something special, but Mangle being the answer just feels empty. Like, yeah, we already know Mangle's in this thing. The head is very obvious on the body. So, like so much else inside of this game, it was a mystery that led to a dead end. But hey, now that we have the complete and definitive roster of who's inside this thing, we can actually start to figure out why they're inside this thing. Because these are some weird picks. When last we left everyone, we had Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. So why do we now have older versions of these animatronics inside the blob? Also, how do we suddenly have FNAF 1 and 2 era animatronics mixed in when none of these older models were a part of FNAF 6's Fire?
Can someone please just use anything other than fire to kill these things? If at first you don't succeed, try again, but at a certain point you just gotta like cut it off and be like, you know what? Maybe there's something else. Silver bullet? Steak in the heart, garlic, just literally anything.
Honestly, this was the main reason I didn't want to cover the blob. It just felt like one big continuity error. But now that I've come to the end of my sanity trying to determine what animatronic a finger belongs to, I think an answer has presented itself to me through the darkness. And you know what? I was wrong. Dead wrong. So the opening area of Security Breach is Rockstar Row, and it's full of memorabilia from the past pizzerias. You got stuff like OG Foxy's torso and jaw placed inside of display cases. There's also Bonnie's guitar, Freddy's bow tie, Chica's cupcake, even random stuff like Chica's feet or animatronic leg pieces. But it's not the items that are there that are interesting, it's the ones that are missing. If you look closely at these display cases, the majority of them have at least one missing item with a small description plaque in front of the empty space. Unfortunately, we can't see what exactly is on the plaques, but if torsos and feet are being displayed, then it isn't too hard to imagine that these could have been the heads, masks, arms, items that have been collected and added to the blob. In fact, that would explain why it's Circus Baby and Funtime Freddy heads inside of the blob instead of Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy. It's not a continuity error like all of us assumed, it's just a really obscure lore point. Remember that FNAF sister location ended with all the animatronics teamed up to form Ennard, a literal tangle of wires and eyeballs, and that was was pretty much it. But once Ennard was puked up and Baby got voted out of the team, that tangle of wires needed shape and form. This in turn gave rise to Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, creatures created from literal trash, not official versions of the characters, for as much as they might look like the original characters. As far as Fazbear Entertainment memorabilia is concerned, the Circus Baby mask and Funtime Freddy head, they're the latest versions of those characters. They're put on display for fans of the series to see. Parts that this tangle of black goo could steal from the displays and absorb into its own being. Same with the OG suits and Mangle Body. Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, meanwhile, they're unofficial characters. They were never created by Fazbear Entertainment or displayed inside of a pizzeria. In short, I'm sorry, Steel Wool. I'm not sorry about a lot of the things I've said about some of the lore decisions in this game, but in this individual case, I'm sorry that I assumed that this was just a sloppy continuity error when in actuality, it was a lot more thoughtful than I could have ever expected. We just didn't give you enough benefit of the doubt here. So, like an overeager Funko Pop collector, there's a tangle of black wires lurking in the Pizzaplex hunting for souvenirs from the franchise. And believe it or not, this actually lines up with a random detail from the story New Kid in the third Fazbear Frights book. As a group of kids are exploring an abandoned Freddy's restaurant, we get this line, quote, "While they were in the bathroom, Devin was pretty sure he heard something slithering through the walls. He didn't say anything. From the way the other boys' faces paled, he knew they heard it too." That is the line, and it never pays off. Not in this story, not in this book, not in the entire book series. The whole story actually winds up being a Golden Freddy story, strangely enough, but it leaves Chekhov's tentacle monster just sitting there in the walls waiting to be used, probably because it was meant to pay off in Security Breach, a game that was originally meant to release closer to that story's publication, but the repeated delays in Security Breach threw all of that synergistic programming off. Alright, so we know why it physically looks the way it does, but really, what are these tentacles? Well, that's where the puppet mask Missing Tears comes in. I think we're all familiar with this thing's story, right? In the aftermath of kids getting killed at Freddy's restaurants, the creator Henry institutes a security program in the form of the puppet. In FNAF 6, we literally see this thing called Security Puppet. Sadly, Henry's daughter Charlie is killed outside of the confines of the restaurant. The puppet finds her too late and lies down beside her in the rain, and the two become one. And in FNAF 6, the last official time that we see this character, it comes complete with tears in its eyes. In fact, in every iteration of the character, the puppet mask has tears. Or should I say almost every iteration? Look at the Security Puppet minigame from before Charlie's death. The mask has no tears. It's only after Charlie dies and the thing is possessed that tears suddenly form on the mask. Tears mean that Charlie's soul is inside of this thing. But now, there are no tears left on the mask because Charlie's soul has been released. She's no longer inside Security Puppet. When Henry burned everything at the end of FNAF 6, it worked. Kinda. It freed all the souls that were trapped inside of the metal. This coincides with what we see on the blueprints for Remnant. Overheating might neutralize the effects permanently. However, it didn't work all the way. There's one thing that Henry's fire didn't account for, something that it didn't purge: agony. You see, Remnant soul metal might be the focus of the games, but it isn't the only powerful force that drives this franchise forward. The other is actually found within the pages of the Fazbear Frights books: agony. Now, it's important to distinguish the difference between agony and Remnant. I've seen a lot of places using the terms interchangeably, but in Fazbear Frights, they're explained to be distinctly different. Remnant
Remnant comes from like children. Agony comes from cursed objects.
Is all about the soul. When an animatronic becomes possessed, that spirit literally becomes attached to the metal. That metal can then be melted down into a substance that Fazbear Frights describes as a boiling liquid mercury, aka Remnant. If you inject that metal into other animatronics, it suddenly brings them to life using the power of the original souls. Compare that to agony. In the books, agony is studied by Dr. Phineas Taggart. He states that agony, quote, has a greater energetic radius and power than any other emotion. I've done numerous experiments to measure, capture, contain, and study the leftover emotion embedded into objects that were near a tragedy. The book even goes so far to explain that the items Phineas has collected weren't possessed by ghosts or spirits, but instead were energized by agony. So when someone feels agony, it doesn't just stay with them, it can infect inanimate objects around them and linger there. In other words, while those original animatronics no longer have spirits powering them, the agony they felt while being murdered remains attached to the suits. That's why the Blob's interested in collecting the suits. It's not collecting spirits, it's collecting agony. By combining them, it becomes more powerful. All the pain and suffering of the children from over the years brought together to create one giant monster. That's why the eyes are glowing red for all the animatronics and endoskeletons. It's also why the puppet and baby aren't glowing. The puppet has been put to rest by her father. She's no longer tormented.
My daughter, if you can hear me, it's time to rest. for you and for those you have carried in your arms.
And baby, well, yeah, she is certainly angry. She is jealous, but she's also eager to please her father even after death.
Now we can do what we were created to do and be complete. I will make you proud, Daddy.
She embraces the monster that she's become. She's not filled with agony, but everyone else, absolutely. Even in that finale speech, we hear Henry say it.
This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away, as the agony of every tragedy should.
Agony! Woo, woo, he did it. He said the word. So there you have it, friends. Over half a year after the game's release, we finally solved the last mystery of Security Breach. The Blob isn't a giant continuity breaker. It's just a very cleverly composed amalgamation of animatronic parts slithering through the walls looking to accumulate agony. The tortured emotions coming from all the old animatronics on display throughout the Pizzaplex. And now that we've solved it, not convinced that we've seen the last of it. Despite the fact that the Afton ending's only worth 2 stars, when the highest is 3, the DLC poster does seem to indicate that the story is gonna follow this particular ending. Notice the melted parts of Chica's face, the ruined Pizzaplex, which directly follows the building collapse and Afton's ending. But look a little closer. There are mysterious red eyes up in the top left, as well as some suspicious looking cables down in the bottom right. Even if the Blob did finally kill Afton during the ending, the agony would still remain. It perseveres beyond death, and it isn't able to simply let go. In short, the Blob is still very much a threat, something that is more powerful than anything we've ever faced in the franchise. In fact, maybe my previous prediction about the Afton amalgamation could still come to pass. As I called out in a previous theory, in the books, Afton gets mixed up with a bunch of agony, which creates a giant monster trash rabbit. And isn't that exactly what we're seeing in the ending of Security Breach? Afton mixed in with a bunch of agony parts. I suspect that Afton may be able to take control of this thing, overriding the Blob's directionless rage and focusing it in order to wreak havoc on Gregory and whoever this new character might be, just like he does during the Stitch Wraith stories from Fazbear Frights. The only issue is, I'm not sure how we'd be able to stop it. In Fazbear Frights, the solution is to see into people's memories and trap them inside those memories. It's a pretty random power, so it's hard to say how that might work in the games. Unless, of course, this new character is meant to be someone that could remind Afton or the Blob of good memories, bringing them back to reality and quelling the agony within. But that, my friends, is a theory for another day. So in the meantime, remember, it's all just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
Yay.
Death is not an option.
What's this one? Check
Sound
this one.
sensor out.
That's the both online.
What if I told you that everything we thought we knew about FNAF was a lie? That Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy were never possessed? That the bite of 87 never happened? Heck, that the bite of 83 never happened? What if I told you that William Afton didn't die because some spirits harassed him in a back room, but because he got careless and wet? What if I told you that Golden Freddy never existed? You would all think that I was crazy, right? That after 60 episodes covering this series that I'd finally lost it, or gotten so desperate that I needed you to throw it all away and start again for content.
Because I feel like I've seen this before. Because of
wet. What if I told you that Golden Freddy
hold on, because this part's right here.
You would all think that I was crazy.
I think I've seen this before because it's done.
Right? That after 60 episodes covering this series that I'd finally lost it, or gotten so desperate that I needed you to throw it all away and start again for content.
Wait a minute.
But I assure you, I'm still here, totally sane, or yes, as sane as I've ever been.
Oh
totally
my god, I just rewatched the whole episode. Just rewatch this one for some reason. It's supposed to be
some, maybe even all of the statements.
Right?
Thing that you thought you knew about FNAF 1, 2, 3, and 4. Possessing animatronics, the crime. This time we remade the Jack.
God dang it, dude. I'm on this one anyways. So I'm not skipping, I'm just...
I've done it. I've solved FNAF. And the clue that brings it all together is this.
Don't you hate getting killed by obscure secondary characters?
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, where today I'm just gonna get straight to the point. This episode was supposed to be our final timeline, but you know what? It's not quite there yet. I think we're gonna have it ready for next week. There's just a few wrinkles that we need to iron out about Elizabeth's death specifically, but otherwise, I feel really good about everything we've pieced together so far. That said, I wanted to put this episode up first regardless, because it dives into a section of the timeline that's likely gonna be controversial, which is also a bad thing because it's the beginning of the timeline. timeline. Nothing like starting off on the wrong foot, you know? So in order to head that one off at the pass, let's just start talking about it now, shall we? Last episode I brought up how the team and I have been tackling this whole timeline project. Basically that we've broken down everything into 3 key sections: the foundation of Freddy's, the Afton era, and post-Purple Guy. In that episode we dug hard into the last chunk, trying to figure out the recent history with things like FNAF VR and Security Breach. But even trickier is the first chunk, the foundation of Freddy's. You see, at this point we all have a general basic knowledge of the games, right? Kids die, animatronics get possessed, all that good stuff. But here, that foundational stuff right at the beginning, that's the murkiest, because honestly, there's not a lot that's immediately clear that we can go off of. Sure, there's a couple of lines from Phone Guy, maybe a sentence or two from the novels, but otherwise, it seems to be about it. How did William Afton and Henry Emily start working together? Were they rivals? Why did Afton start killing in the first place? Was Fredbear's Family Diner truly the first location? These are questions that seem important for us to answer, and honestly, if you're looking at where the timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's really begins, it's with those sorts of questions. The only problem is that the answers just might not exist anywhere in the canon yet, or so I initially thought, which brings us to today's episode. I suspect that there may be a way to answer some, if not all of those questions, using a mix of evidence from the games, the books, and real-life lore. In the process, I think it'll help us get a better understanding of William Afton's motives, while also outlining a rough sequence of events that'll ultimately help place locations and other things when I tackle the full timeline of the series next week. And all of it hinges on one thing: a set of obscure secondary characters named the Mediocre Melodies. Orville Elephant, Ned Bear, Pig Patch, Happy Frog, and of course, Mr. Hippo.
Sometimes a story is just a story. You try to read into every little thing and find meaning in everything anyone says, you'll just drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, I know, Mr. Hippo, I get it. That has been leveled at me more times than I can count. But I think in this case, we actually didn't read into you enough. You see, when the Mediocres were first introduced in Pizzeria Simulator, we, as the community, largely dismissed them. And why wouldn't we? This is a game where you're pulling animatronics out of a dumpster. Trash and the gang are literally made of garbage. Why would we think that some random barnyard-themed characters would be worth our attention when there was already so much established lore inside of the thing? We beat the game, we solved the lore, we moved on.
No one's
then
saying
the Ultimate Custom Night released, and there they were again. It was strange to see him fill so many slots, but I don't know, there was also Trash in the Gang, and Music Man! Other random pulls from the character deep cuts, so maybe it was just Scott trying to fill out the roster. But then something unexpected happened. Well, they were mostly treated as a joke. If you died to them, every once in a while they'd give voice to the most important character and mystery from the game. The one you shouldn't have killed, Cassidy.
We've only just begun. I will never let you leave. I will never let you rest.
It was a huge revelation, and the lines that they spoke ultimately helped us to determine that Custom Night was William Afton's endless torment at the hands of the spirits inside the Golden Freddy suit. But again, none of us ever stopped to consider why them? Why these characters? Why were they the ones that Cassidy was choosing to speak through? Why are they here?
Hey,
well, after doing a lot of
Cassie,
research
Cassie,
for the grand
ugly,
overall timeline, now I think I know. The Mediocre Melodies were Henry's creation from a time before he and William started working together. When the two men merged their ideas together to form one company, the Mediocres became temporary characters at Fredbear's Family Diner before eventually being retired and largely forgotten. Oh yeah! That is a lot of big swings that I'm making with some massive assumptions, so let's just rewind and take it one step at a time, shall we? First, how do we know that the Mediocre Melodies belong to Henry? Well, let's just look at their design. It's very simple. They're similar to the Endo 01 designs from the FNAF 1 animatronics, but even more rudimentary, with less flexible joints and less complex wiring. But the important point here is that for each one, the upper jaw and the lower jaw are entirely separate, operating using a very basic hinge towards the back of the head, or 2 metal bars that slide.
I would be on this one, but I accidentally rewatched an episode because I didn't realize. You had a sleepover? Nice.
Up and down along the side. And you see, that right there is what tells us they belong to Henry. Well, there are plenty of animatronics that fall into a nebulous zone of who designed them. There are a few pieces of tech that we can definitely trace back to their original creator. The Funtime animatronics, for instance, definitely came from Afton. Not only were they designed with the intent of luring and capturing children, something that just doesn't jive with Henry, but the blueprints outright have Afton Robotics written in the corner. Not much you can do to deny that one. Sound illusion discs? Another Afton creation, considering the backs of them are stamped with
Y'all quit messing around.
I'm not getting a Honda.
His company name as we see in the graphic novels. But the one I'm most interested in today is Lefty, the animatronic designed by Henry used to capture his daughter the puppet during FNAF 6. That was clearly not an Afton project. This was purely Henry's doing in secret. So, knowing that, did you happen to notice the two straight metal rods in the schematics with the jaw fully detached from the top of the head? It's an exact match for the design of Happy Frog. It's a Henry signature. But why does that matter? Well, the designs of the mediocres also perfectly match up to the first generation of Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica. We know that the Wizards were the earliest form of our core 4 animatronics. These were the ones that had children stuffed inside of them and got possessed. They outright tell us this fact in Ultimate Custom Night.
But like, how are the Wither ones the first?
I have seen everything.
But have you ever stopped to look at how the Wizards were constructed? They use the exact same techniques as the mediocre Melodies. They have a full separation between the tops of their head and their jaws. Withered Freddy and Foxy both have the hinge opening in the back like we see with Pig Patch, and Withered Chica follows the Happy Frog and Lefty model with bars in the jaw to aid in opening and closing the mouth. Think this is just a coincidence? Look at Chica in other games. Chica in FNAF 1, a fundamentally different design. Funtime Chica, definitely not. Toy Chica, nope. The only other time we see this sort of fully separated head design for animatronics is with the FNAF 6 Rockstar animatronics. Ones that, again, we know were built by Henry as part of his plan to lure everyone back to his pizzeria trap. In short, the animatronic design seems to be giving us a timeline of events. The mediocres and Wizards were built by Henry early in the timeline of the games. Eventually, Afton starts to influence the designs more and more until Henry comes back to design the robots that were used for his pizzeria trap. But again, I ask, why does any of this matter? Isn't this just a minor detail? Me looking for connections where they don't really matter? No. Knowing that the Wizards and the mediocres share a design seems like it might help explain another part of the lore, Happiest Day. In FNAF 3's Happiest Day minigame, we walk past children wearing masks that match the coloring and rough shape of the mediocres. Pink pig, green frog, purple hippo, orange elephant, blue... okay, not all of them match. But here's the thing, I'm not the one pointing that detail out. This is actually coming from Scott Cawthon himself. In the Five Nights at Freddy's Ultimate Guide, the character description for each mediocre Melody calls this out as something worth noting. Quote, it's unconfirmed, but a child in the FNAF 3 Happiest Day minigame appears to be wearing a Happy Frog mask, Orville mask, Mr. Hippo mask. Every single entry mentions this specific detail. Seems like an odd fan theory to call so much attention to. And remember, Happiest Day is an exact recreation of the FNAF 4 pizzeria. We enter at the stage where Crying Child's bitten, we pass 3 tables, there's a bit of a gap, and then the final birthday table for the cake that's gonna set Crying Child's soul free. It seems to suggest that at some point the mediocre Melodies existed in one version of the restaurant right alongside Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica. But how could all that be? Well, it's easier than you might think. In the story The Puppet Carver, we read about the Pizza Playground, a restaurant that seems to predate or be a competitor to Freddy's. And in it, we see that the franchise...
I'm trying to think whether I should do I'm gonna be playing a horror game and it took a few hours long.
Uses
I don't
very
know whether I should
rudimentary
stream
animatronics
that
that break down a lot. There's a pig
called
with a
Sarah
banjo,
is
an
missing.
off-brand bear named Baron Von Bear, and an unknown bird animatronic. It's the mediocre Melodies, guys. Pig Patch, Ned Bear, and hold on, there's no bird in the mediocre Melodies. Unless, of course, we're talking about Chica. What this story seems to heavily suggest is that Chica started at a different pizza franchise and eventually crossed over into Freddy's, becoming popular enough to eventually join the core
I want to get the simulator.
Also working at that pizza playground
I didn't know
is
they
a
made a
talented
second one and a
creator
third
named
one.
Porter, someone who seems to have the ability to make wood-based animatronics come to life. In short, it's the book's stand-in for Henry. Henry may not be the most technologically advanced creator out there, but whatever he creates contains this certain X factor about it, a spark of life. It's how he's able to create endoskeletons out of nothing but wood. No power, no nothing, just wood and a childlike imagination. This, I think, starts to give us an important piece in the puzzle. Afton was the business guy, a tech bro who was smart and could build machines able to mimic voices and transform and launch giant claws out of their stomachs for no apparent reason. But it was Henry who had the pure love of his craft, that intangible thing that just couldn't be replicated, and it drove Afton crazy. In the Silver Eyes novel, we read a bit about Afton's old journals, that they were, quote, full of raving paranoia, passages about Henry that ranged from wild jealousy to near worship, which now gets us moving towards a motive. You see, one thing that I kept getting stuck on in the building of a timeline was the question of why. Why does Afton kill? And out of everyone, why does he kill Henry's daughter, Charlie, specifically? She is one of, if not the first victim of the entire series. So why does Afton do it? Just because he's evil? Just because he's drunk from the bar at Junior's? No. I think Afton both loved and hated his business partner.
There is nothing like a Wendy.
Got Wendy's. I'm muting the sound. You don't get to hear nothing about Wendy's.
Wendy's.
He admired him and his magic, but also despised him for his success. This contradiction starts to point us to Afton's motive for murder. It also finally helps give us a framework for the early parts of their story. Loyal theorists, let me now point us to the most obvious place that we should have been looking for lore this entire time: the history of the Chuck E. Cheese franchise. Because in a game all about animatronic pizza restaurants, why would we not look to see what creative inspiration Scott might have gotten from the real-life franchise that started it all? I am so dumb. It took me researching an episode over on food theory to finally realize that I should have at least considered this at some point during the last 7 years of solving FNAF. Major head test moment. Anyway, I did exactly that, and what I learned was enlightening, to say the least. You see, what we now know of as Chuck E. Cheese actually started as the product of a feud between two rival animatronic pizza restaurants, Pizza Time Theater and Showbiz Pizza Place. Pizza Time was founded by a smart businessman who wanted to recreate Disneyland's Country Bear Jamboree. In the end, their onstage show wound up soulless and had no solid theme. Showbiz Pizza, meanwhile, had a creator who built better robotic attractions that were full of life. They also had a solid theme where everyone had
that thing is, I've seen that thing like Bose Bandit. I've seen that
Southern accents and a lot of charm. I mean, just watch the clips and the difference is immediately clear.
Like, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, you get it?
See, we're all up here on the stage, and we can all turn, go around a big circle together. See, like this, our feet aren't screwed to the floor or bolted down. We can move. We got more moves than a can of worms. And then that old 1-2 Billy Bob can come up there and stick his old ugly mug in your face.
To me, the battle between these two real-life pizza places, these two men, sounds a lot like the battle between William and Henry, a smart businessman who wanted to riff off Disney's Bear Show versus a talented artist that was building animatronics with actual life and good Southern accents.
I was just waiting for you to drop your guard.
Even small details of the real-life story map nicely onto the games, like the fact that these pizza places had small cabaret stages off to the side for extra acts to get added later, just like how Foxy stands alone in Pirate Cove, a separate act that we see was the last one added to the...
I don't know if it's really, I don't know if this one's true, but I heard that like Foxy used to be on the stage. This train shut up. If Foxy used to be on the stage and he bit a child and he was forced to stay over there in the
In real life, Pizza Time Theater, the one I most associate with William Afton, went heavily into debt and was forced to merge with Showbiz Pizza. That meant that, at least for a while, all the animatronics existed under one roof, but because the characters from Pizza Time were stronger for branding, specifically Chuck E. Cheese, that's the ones that they ultimately moved forward with. I suspect that something similar happened in the games. William's bear-themed restaurant went heavily in debt. He gets saved by his rival Henry, and the two merge their restaurants together to create Fazbear Entertainment. Chica, a mediocre melody, officially joins Fredbear's cast of friends, and the rest are slowly phased out to obscurity. And William, angry and bitter, never truly lives down the humiliation of his failure, prompting him to lash out in a drunken rage against Charlie one night behind the pizzeria. This feels right to me, to set up William as more than just an evil purple guy. This flow of events actually gives him a reason to want to kill, a motive. It also aligns with a lot of the interviews that Steel Wool Studios has been doing recently. J-Top, creative director at Steel Wool, recently acknowledged how important it is for your horror villain to be an actual, fully fleshed out, tragic character.
Try not to set out to make a cool looking villain, you know?
What is that in the background, bro? What is that thing? What is that behind there? That's probably nothing. What is this?
Go make a monster. They have a reason for it. Look at like anthology horror. Here's somebody doing something really, really bad. Like they murdered someone. Something happens, often ironically, that then comes back to bite them. A creature is created, a situation is created, and then they're judged and they get their just desserts. Every big, horror icon essentially fits that structure in a way. Why is Freddy Krueger popular? Well, it's a revenge story, isn't it? Miss Voorhees, it's a revenge story. These aren't just like these supernatural forces that came out of nowhere to just hurt people and punish people. They were results of other wrongdoing.
William Afton, if I'm right, follows this exact pattern. His jealousy over Henry's skill causes him to lash out, which in turn dominoes to him building the very robots that'll eventually take Elizabeth and his crying child son away from him. The other thing that this mediocre melody timing issue may help explain is Cassidy's death. In the Fazbear Frights books, there's Andrew, who's basically the book stand-in for Cassidy. I know we're always supposed to take things in the books with a grain of salt, but Andrew here is an angry spirit that keeps William's soul tethered to a hellish purgatory so it can be punished again and again and again. He's also known to have had his body stuffed inside of Golden Freddy, so really the connections between the two aren't subtle. But Andrew has two unusual details about him. First, he wears an alligator mask. Second, and even more strangely, it's repeatedly made clear that his soul is attached not to an animatronic or an endoskeleton or anything like that, but to a battery pack, of all things. Now that is unusual. He's stuffed into Golden Freddy, but his soul is in a battery pack. Where in this franchise do we see animatronics using battery packs, let alone off-branded animals using battery packs? Oh wait, it's the mediocre melodies. Could they possibly have been around during the missing children's incident? Yes. Given what we already talked about with the Generation 1 Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica matching the designs of the mediocre melodies, it's certainly possible. We also see that the Golden Freddy suit has the same Henry style of design. In both the Fazbear Frights illustrations as well as FNAF 4's minigames, we see that Golden Freddy has the separated jaw controlled by two straight bars, just like Lefty and just like Happy Frog. And last but certainly not least, we come all the way back around to the point that I started this whole episode with. Cassidy speaks through them, of all characters. Not through Golden Freddy, not through Fredbear, through the mediocre melodies. The animatronics with a battery pack. Just thought it was an interesting series of connections. So anyway, those were some stray observations that I've been kicking around about the mediocres. What do you think? Do they have greater lore importance to the story than we initially thought, or are they just meant to be a joke? Am I just falling victim to everything that Mr. Hippo warned me against? Let me know down in the comments below now, because this is your last chance for them to affect the final FNAF timeline for 2022. Our interpretation of all the events in the series up to now. That episode will become—
Shut up, Matt.
Nobody can tell you how to treat yourself.
Today we end the torment. 19 books, 11 games, 8 whole years, all leading to this moment. The ultimate FNAF timeline is finally complete. The pieces are in place for us. Now all we have to do is put this story of tragedy, jealousy, and loss back together. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that feels like a kid revealing the class project that he's been working on all year. Except here, it's the class project that I've been working on for the past decade of my life. This one is big, my friends, and I gotta admit, kinda nervous. I haven't attempted a timeline video on this franchise since 2018, back in the days when Mike was the crying child, Afton coming back was actually a surprise, and Fazgoo wasn't a phrase I'd ever thought I'd have to utter. But since the last time I did something like this, we've had 3 more massive games, the death and revival of the FNAF movie, and more robot kids than you can shake a staff bot at.
Aren't we still missing a FNAF game? Because he was supposed to release one in 2018.
It's exhausting trying to keep track of this whole franchise.
Like way back. Somewhere right there. But he said it and he showed it. And it had the name and all, but it was never...
Which honestly is why I'm here today. The lore at this point is complicated. It is full of speculation and theory. So to hopefully make it a little easier for everyone and to give us all a baseline to talk about this franchise moving forward into the future, it's time to reveal my current working FNAF timeline. But just before I do, I just want to explain a couple of things. First, this timeline is massive. Seriously, it is huge. This thing towers over any video project we have ever done on the channel. But when you look at the totality of this franchise, the story of FNAF really boils down to the story of one man, William Afton. His successes, his failures, his rise to becoming co-owner of one of the most successful restaurant franchises in the world, and his eventual fall to the monsters he helped to create, only to then be reborn in a new digital form later. That's why I've decided to split this timeline into 3 main chunks. The foundation of Freddy's, how the business started and how it came into being, the Afton era, William's decades-long murder spree, and post-Purple Guy. Basically modern FNAF. Everything that happens after the pizzeria simulator fire. And because there are lots of new big revelations in this thing that seemingly come out of nowhere, as well as just points I want to talk about further, I decided to dedicate one episode to each chunk. I originally wanted it to be one seamless continuous video, but it just felt incomplete without some sort of explanation at the end of each one. Once this whole thing's done, I promise I'm gonna merge all the narrative bits into one massive video so you can just skip my explanations. But for now, this just felt like the best, most satisfying, most complete way to do this. That being said, this is still about the story, the broad strokes of the franchise. So in order to make sure that you guys know that I'm not just pulling answers out of thin air, not only am I discussing some of the more controversial bits at the end of each chunk, we're also putting in a handy little graphic in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, which will show thumbnails, video titles, books, and any other citations that we need throughout the video. So if you wish to understand that specific statement in more detail, you know exactly where we've taken it from. That way you can look into those details for yourself. So sit back, grab some popcorn, or your pitchforks if you're the type to get upset when I say something controversial, and make sure that you subscribe, since this is going to be a video that you're going to want to come back to a few times in order to fully dissect. Without any more waiting, I present to you the story of a loving, obsessive father who slowly descended into madness, and along the way discovered the secret to eternal life. Our story begins not in the 1980s, or even in the 1970s, but all the way back in the 1930s. It was the throes of the Great Depression, and people were in desperate need of cheap entertainment, especially in Utah, one of the states hit hardest, fourth highest unemployment in the nation, and full of transients. People looking for work in Salt Lake, finding none, and ultimately moving on to find their fortunes out in California. People were tired and they were hungry, but as they traveled, there was one thing that could lift their spirits: a simple roadside attraction called Fredbear's Singin' Show. The ads were plastered all over town, featuring an animated bear drawn in the popular pie-eyed cartoon style for characters at the time. He resembled cartoons like Mickey Mouse, Felix the Cat, Betty Boop. It immediately said that this, Fredbear's, was a place where you could bring the family. And the price, honestly, couldn't be beat. For 50 cents, you could get food and entertainment as you watched the local trained real-life dancing bear perform on stage. Normally, you only got to see dancing bears at large traveling circuses like Barnum and Bailey, where the tickets would go for about $1. That's $1 without food. But this was a smaller show, like the type from the Vaughn brothers or the Robbins brothers, where tickets would sell for just a mere 50 cents. Watching that bear do tricks on stage brought a glimmer of joy at a time when so much was wrong with the world. The simple show would go on for years, bringing happiness to hundreds of travelers passing through looking for a quick meal. But it left a permanent impression on one little boy, capturing his imagination in a way that nothing else had. One little boy named Billy. That was his nickname at least, but his parents liked to call him William Afton. The bear could dance, it could sing. For decades, William dreamed of recreating that moment of bringing a musical bear to life, but how? William was smart, without a doubt, and he had a keen mind for business, but he wasn't the most creative. How do you make a singing, dancing bear come to life? The best he could do was using rudimentary costumes. William was inspired by the work of Walt Disney, who throughout the 50s and 60s was pioneering the use of mascot suits throughout his theme park. The big innovation? Suits with 5 fingers. This allowed the performers wearing the suits to use their natural arms and hands to interact with the guests.
Come on. What
as opposed to the older models where the arms would just hang limply by their sides. Finally, with a simple mascot suit, he would be able to realize his child.
Sorry to say an update too. Wait, FNAF 2. What? FNAF 2, the fourth wall. Fourth Wall 2 collaboration between Scott Games and Golden Studios, released on Steam on Game Jolt for $5. And also, wait, it's on Steam? Well, you watch this real quick. I'm gonna go check that out on Steam.
childhood dream. He would be able to bring Fredbear to life. To appeal to the kids, and for copyright reasons, he changed Fredbear from a realistic brown animal to a cartoonish yellow bear with a purple hat and bow tie. But feeling like one character wasn't enough, he added another friend, a yellow rabbit with a purple vest and matching tie named Bonnie the Bunny. While Fredbear was certainly his first love, Bonnie was extra special because that was his. It was an original character that he had created from scratch. And I do mean scratch. William's hand-sewn costumes were rough, with seams and stitches visibly showing, but it was the best that he could do. And you know what? It was just enough. Bonnie and Fredbear would perform on stage to small but enthusiastic crowds. Finally, he was able to deliver fantasy and fun to all the kids, delighting and inspiring them in the exact way that he had been delighted and inspired so many years ago. And things could have ended there. That could have been the end to his story. It could have been perfect had it not been for one thing. Other people saw the success of his idea and they wanted in. Enter Chica's Party World, a rival restaurant starring performing animal characters. His idea, except they did it better. William may have been the first, but obviously he wasn't the best. It hurt the prideful William Afton to admit it, but this restaurant was able to do the thing that he always wanted to do: make the animals actually come to life. All of the performers in this restaurant were robots, simple metal skeletons that were powered by battery packs, but all of them able to freely turn and talk and dance on their own, no human required. It was like magic. Magic that came from the mind of a brilliant creator named Henry Emily. This Henry, in some small way, had been able to harness the power of life itself. Afton admired him. He was jealous, to be sure, but he also looked upon this man with awe. Off to one side of Chica's Party World was a small cabaret stage featuring an elephant magician. On the other, a hippo known to ramble on and on. That one was more of a joke for the parents, but it was the main stage that was for the kids. A rocking band of characters featuring a yellow chicken thing with a southern drawl named Chica, backed by a band of other country-themed characters, including a pig with a banjo, an upbeat frog from the local swimming hole, and a brown bear with a heavy southern accent. Wait, a bear? But bears were his animals. Why not a cow or a horse? Something to fit the country theme a bit better. Why did it have to be a bear? And adding insult to injury, they had the nerve to call this thing Ned Bear, a direct copy of his own Fredbear.
Whoops, that's gonna leave a mark.
No, that was not okay. Afton's jealous admiration turned to hardened bitterness. A bitterness that would only grow over the next couple of years as families continued to choose Chica's Party World over Fredbear's. William just couldn't compete with the appeal of the robots. Eventually, his restaurant would go bankrupt, only to get bailed out by, of course, Henry Emily. Another insult, another humiliation that William wouldn't soon forget. 1979. Despite being bitter, Afton couldn't deny that what came next was a period of massive success and expansion. With the two franchises now merged into one, it was the best of both worlds. Afton's ideas with Henry's robotic expertise. The two men decided to launch under a new name, Fredbear's Family Diner, a pizza chain that would eventually come to feature a mix of humans in performing suits as well as on-stage animatronics. They decided to stick with Fredbear as the headliner, considering the yellow bear was easily identifiable as a brand and because he was the original performing animal mascot. Afton appreciated that. This new restaurant would also see a mix of characters as the two franchises merged into one, with Pig Patch and Happy Frog performing right alongside Fredbear and Bonnie. And as part of this one big Fredbear family, they even got themselves official merch that were released, ranging from masks to magnets.
The crappy Mr. Hippo fridge magnet?
I'm sorry, Gregory.
That said, not all the characters were winners. The reception to some characters was just mediocre, so they faded away into the dumpster, storage units, and retro budget tech stores of lost nostalgia, waiting for their chance to step back into the limelight if and when a headliner went out of commission. Others, though, would fare much better, like a new Pirate Fox, as well as a blue guitar-playing variant of the yellow Bonnie Bunny. Ultimately, the franchise would get so big, it would spawn its own cartoon show, Fredbear and Friends. Business was booming. In the end, Fredbear and Bonnie's popularity would be so strong that they would be able to support the Fredbear's Family Diner franchise all on their own, while also spinning off a new sister location dedicated to their friends. In 1983, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza launched, giving a dedicated home to all this new supporting cast of characters: Chica the Chicken, Bonnie the Blue Bunny, Foxy the Pirate, and of course the headliner, a brown Freddy Fazbear. Business was good, and Afton was happy, mostly. It did bother him that the one original character that he created created. The one that he himself played, Golden Bonnie, got passed over for inclusion in that cartoon show. The only character in the roster of regulars to get ignored for the show, but other than that, things were going smoothly. He had himself a wife, 2 sons, a daughter, he had a thriving business, and best of all, he was able to learn the craft of robotics from the man that he both loved and hated, Henry. Together, they were constantly pushing the limits of what these characters could do. Because it was quick and easy, new characters introduced into the roster would be given a simple hand-sewn suit with 5 fingers that any performer could wear. Eventually, Henry would design one of his signature animatronics for that character, utilizing a divided mouth with either a hinged or sliding jaw design. This was the first generation of animatronics. But why?
This camera's unbelievable. Video that looks cinematic.
You can use it on a small gimbal.
It's a game changer.
Stop there. Afton had big ideas. What if the animatronics weren't just locked to the stage, but could freely roam the restaurant and interact with the kids? What if his mascot suits could become animatronics? What if you could use more than just rigid metallic skeletons? Why not experiment with tubes and wires that would give the animatronics fluidity and flexibility while still providing structure? The possibilities for this technology were endless. Afton fell in love with robotics. He had started with a dream of bringing one simple singing bear to life, but with robots, he had stumbled across the tools that gave him the ability to control life itself. And thanks to Henry, he was practically speedrunning his way to an engineering degree. And while William wouldn't admit it out loud, one other thing that kept pushing him forward was the desire to beat his former rival, to prove himself smarter and more capable, to surpass the man who everyone else considered to be a visionary genius. But pride cometh before the fall, and tragedy was about to strike. Okay, so that brings us to the end of part 1 of the story. That said, at the end of each of these chunks, I want to break down some of the logical leaps that I made, since the more narrative format doesn't give me much of a chance to justify a lot of the big decisions. And admittedly, there are some large leaps in here. Let's just start off with Fredbear's Singin' Show, shall we? We know, based on the retro poster that was hidden in Security Breach, that at least at one point, Fredbear was an actual bear. And like I called out in that narrative segment, dancing bear shows were a real form of entertainment. The only problem is that, timing-wise, none of our main characters would be the people in charge of that business in the 30s and a series of pizza restaurants in the 80s without him just being extremely old. Best case scenario, if Afton's running the Singin' Show when he's 18, that still puts him at nearly 70 when the first pizzeria opens and his murder spree begins. That just doesn't make a lot of logical sense because he doesn't become immortal until his first death in Springtrap. That's why I suspect that Fredbear's Singin' Show was either a family business that Afton then carried on to a new generation, or something that he saw as a kid and just wanted to recreate when he grew up. The Fredbear Singin' Show thing also starts laying the groundwork for some of the core elements of this story, that Freddy's was a place of fantasy and fun, and that Afton, despite eventually falling to become the heartless serial killer and mad scientist that we know him as, began as someone with good intentions and a love of entertaining kids. He wanted to bring things to life from the very beginning, a theme that recurs a lot for him throughout the rest of the franchise. Next up, let's talk about those mascot costumes. One thing that I keep going back to is the design of Glitch Trap. It's a handcrafted suit. You can see the seams and everything. It even has 5 fingers for the performer's hands. It is very much not a Springtrap suit. This is something much more rudimentary. It came at a time before animatronics were a part of the story. That's why I suspect that it was actually the first, predating literally everything. It's also a suit that is very personal to Afton. He put his digital consciousness in that form. It's his personal avatar. It's the way that he sees himself. There's also a whole separate discussion to be had here about the habits and rituals of serial killers. So the fact that he's choosing to lure kids and kill them in this particular suit actually says a lot about his emotional attachment to it. So while Fredbear seems to have started as someone else's creation, Golden Bonnie was uniquely Williams, giving him a personal connection. And that's not all. In this whole franchise, only one set of characters have themselves 5 fingers, the Nightmares. Even Golden Freddy, Fredbear was a 5-fingered wearable suit at one point in the story, as we see in this shot from the graphic novel, before he, like everyone else, was turned into an animatronic. This seems to imply that all of the main characters had similar wearable mascot outfits at least at one point in time, and that whoever is having the FNAF 4 nightmares, if they even are nightmares, something that we'll touch on in part 2, saw those mascot suits specifically. Lastly, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. The literal elephant, Orville Elephant, as well as the rest of the mediocre melodies. For a while now, I've suspected that the mediocre melodies played a much more important role in the story than just being a bunch more animatronics to fill out the roster. Especially Ned Bear, which is just so suspiciously close to Fredbear. And yet, there are 2 key details that we're gonna have to justify with any mediocre melodies mention. One, they're very rudimentary with external battery packs, implying that they come very early in the timeline. And 2, we know that at minimum, Mr. Hippo does eventually become an official member of the extended Freddyverse. But if these things are supposed to be cheap, generic rip-offs, why would you be trying to rip off yourself? You wouldn't. You would be stealing someone else's ideas. So if Afton created Fredbear, there would have to be some rival franchise. The only other person who would likely be ripping him off? Henry. We've talked extensively about how the mediocre melodies are clearly Henry's design aesthetic, so it just has to be him. I don't think Henry's doing this maliciously. He doesn't strike me as the type. He was likely building the robots at the orders of someone else that was running a rival restaurant franchise. But that's enough motivation to start Afton down a path of jealous rivalry, but also begrudging admiration. As the Freddy Files Ultimate Edition says, it's important to revisit the beginning of Henry and William's relationship, so here you go. I think this is where it begins. Also, this is future Matt Pat here coming back to add this one in. Seems like the recently released character encyclopedia has backed up all of this speculation. I've had this timeline written for about a month now, but I've also been holding off a bit to see what wrenches this character encyclopedia might throw into it. And on this particular point, I gotta say, it seems like we might actually have nailed it. They actively call out the suspicious similarities to the main Fredbear crew. Quote from one of the pages: Ned Bear looks like an imitation, altered just enough to avoid copyright issues. I don't know about you, but that seems to imply that we were right on the money. Knowing all of this, at one point the franchises had to have merged. That's really the only way that you get Mr. Hippo from the rival franchise as part of the Fazbear crew. This also mirrors a lot of what happened in the real-life history of Chuck E. Cheese, with 2 rival restaurants, each with their own casts of characters, merging to become one unified brand. Again, we've gone into that in detail with other videos, just wanted to remind you all of that here. But why would I call out the rival restaurant as being named Chica's Party World? Few things, actually. First, we know for a fact that a location named Chica's Party World exists. It is mentioned in the source code teasing sister location, so it is out there somewhere and doesn't fit cleanly anywhere. Second, in the story The Puppet Carver, Chica is very explicitly looped in with the book versions of Pig Patch and Ned Bear, implying that she started as a mediocre melody. Thirdly, her design just fits better with the theme of down-home country animals with southern accents playing the banjo and eating with bibs. And with her being the headliner of the show with her name on the restaurant, it would make sense then that when the restaurants merged, she was the one that was added to the main cast of characters while all the other mediocres faded away. It's also why when Freddy's closes after William's killing spree, she's the one to branch back off into her old franchise and is therefore missing in sister location, a detail that's bothered me for years at this point. It might also explain why William decided to stuff his first dead kid into Chica. That one was Henry's creation, not his. Is all of this a big leap? Yeah. Is it connecting a lot of dots that are very spread out across the franchise that I've been holding on in the back of my mind for years? Absolutely. But I think it makes sense. It also serves as a clean answer to a lot of the random threads that Scott's been leaving dangling for years. So with all of that in mind, my friends, we can close the book on the foundation of Freddy's. And don't worry, next week I'll be back to give you arguably one of the most confusing parts of this entire timeline situation, part 2, the Afton era. I promise it will actually be next week this time. No more waiting around. I am just as eager to get this one out the door as you are to watch it. I promise. You know what else I promise? I promise that we'll actually get to talking about the games. I would have liked to have talked about them in this episode, but hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, and officially page 7 of the FNAF timeline script. Last time we covered the origins of Freddy's. We talked about William Afton's childhood dream project of making a singing bear come to life, and the infuriating moment that his dream is copied by a rival restaurant franchise looking to steal away his success. The merger of the 2 franchises results in William meeting Henry, a brilliant designer with a knack for robotics. Working together, they make Fredbear's flourish, spawning popular Saturday morning cartoon shows, toy lines, and spin-off restaurants under the Fazbear name. When last we left him, Afton was thriving, the world of robotics opening his eyes to new and exciting ways of bringing characters to life. Bringing things to life, yeah, that was his core driving force, his passion. And it was this very passion that would mutate, twist, and morph from here on out in the story. Because with life, there is inevitably death, something that Afton would become intimately familiar with. But before Afton acquaints himself with death, I want you to take some time to acquaint yourself with our newest channel. Guys, this is a huge moment for us theorists. For the last decade, we've had this 4-player controller icon, and now we finally fill in the final missing piece. Get ready for the rollout of our newest theorist channel. Drumroll, please. Style Theory, where we're looking at the science.
I was wrong for both.
Math, psychology, history, and mystery of the way you look, your clothing, fashion trends, hygiene, and makeup. Now, I know that theorizing about style might sound weird at first, stop a bullet. There's also practical everyday stuff too on this channel. Do school uniforms actually benefit the students? Does it make a difference whether or not you wash your legs in the shower? That's the
probably
sort of stuff that you can find on this new channel. In fact, there are 5 new episodes that you can check out right after you finish this beast of an upload. I personally recommend starting with the Killer Heel episode because this episode's all about the birth of a killer. And while you're over there, consider subscribing. It'll do all of us over here a huge favor because if we manage to get 1 million subscribers by the end of the month, it'll put us as a top fashion channel here on YouTube. Show the world that looking smart can be even better than looking cool. So go ahead, enjoy your all-day theory marathon. And now with our logo complete, it's time to complete our other massive ongoing project, this timeline. Onward to part 2, where things are about to get dark in a hurry. 1983, business was booming with 2 whole restaurant franchises running, Fredbear's Family Diner and the newly opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Together, William and Henry had been able to take the hybrid suit idea and make it into a reality. They called their new invention the Springlock suit. Fittingly enough,
how are you gonna make theories for books?
Was symbolic of the partnership between these 2 men. A human suit as designed by William that could become a
I want to see Harry Potter theory. No, I don't read.
Freestanding Henry-style robot. But because it was still new tech with kinks to work out, the rollout was limited, restricted only to the Fredbear's Family Diner location. All of this meant that William was busier than ever. He didn't have time to be a full-time parent, so he designed a nanny cam system where cameras and speakers were hidden throughout the neighborhood, as well as in his youngest son's favorite toy, Psychic Friend Fredbear. I mean, plushie Fredbear. But since cameras just weren't enough to raise a kid, he also left childcare duties.
He didn't do that. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Who are you gonna call Psychic Friend Fredbear? He didn't do it. I muted it by accident.
Michael was far from the best babysitter. He tormented his younger brother by jump-scaring him with a Foxy mask and constantly left him behind. William watched all of it from his cameras. Kids would be kids. Tomorrow was another day, after all. Except Michael's torment didn't stop. Bitter, angry thoughts would run through Michael's mind. Why did he have to be the one to take care of this whining crybaby all the time? It just wasn't fair. It was time that he got even with his brother by playing the ultimate prank. A prank that just so happened to be on this crying child's birthday. He and his friends would take his scared little brother and make him do the one thing that he was terrified of doing, getting close to the animatronics. That would be embarrassing for the kid that was such an embarrassment to him. His brother squirmed, screamed, kicked, and fought, but just as they were putting that small, squirming boy up to Fredbear's lips, the mouth snapped shut. The sensitive spring locks inside the body had been triggered by the boy's movements, and they'd immediately clamped down. The wriggling stopped. The boy went limp, but it was just a prank. It was meant to be funny. The boy was taken to the hospital and was immediately given an IV. Flowers and pills filled the nightstand next to his hospital bed, but the damage was too severe. He couldn't recover. As the younger brother's consciousness began to fade, he could hear Michael's last words, a small and flimsy apology. But his father, Williams, through the voice of the Fredbear plush, were a firm and committed promise to a dying son. You're broken.
You did the math, doggo.
I will put you back together. This would not be the end. No matter what, William's son would live again. It would just take time. Time that right now he just didn't have. His young son's heart flatlined as the boy faded into the inky unknown of the afterlife. In the aftermath of the tragedy, changes started happening around the restaurants. Kids were now required to wear security wristbands to prevent anyone from getting outside without parental permission. Any kid who approached the exit without permission would have to answer to the security puppet.
You know what's an easy calculator? Just go calculator. Boom. Calculator.
A marionette on strings that could fly around on rails across the restaurant to stop kids in their tracks. It was William's idea, inspired by Michael constantly leaving the restaurant without his brother. In the wake of Fredbear's Springlock failure, all the hybrid suits were getting retired, locked away at the nearby Freddy Fazbear location. It was yet another tough pill to swallow after all the hard work that he and Henry had put into them. William would eventually bury the boy's small body in a remote location out in the woods right alongside his drive into and out of work every day. The death of this little boy sent the family spiraling. His wife, crippled with grief, was so distraught that all she could do was sit and watch TV. But his son, Michael, was...
He already did a theory on this way back. About how strong the animatronic needs to be to do that.
Far worse, complaining of seeing hallucinations of a golden bear standing outside of his window. The boy was so racked with guilt that he was convinced that he was being haunted by the ghost of his brother stuck inside the suit that took his life. The suit's three-toed feet digging into the wet earth. The words, "It's me," ringing through Michael's ears. Some nights, Michael would even go so far as to break out of his room to check the gravesite and ensure that his brother was still there. As for William himself, he disappeared into his work and his drinks. Junior's, the local bar, wasn't far from his son's gravesite. He found himself going there more and more frequently, spending longer and longer amounts of time there. The bar gave him a place to think, to remember, to reflect and stew on how Henry had stolen his idea for an animal-themed restaurant, how they'd cut his character out of the cartoon when everyone else was there, how Henry had humiliated him by buying him out of bankruptcy, and now there was his son. Henry had taken his son from him. The robotic part was the part that failed after all. William ordered one more drink, but it was one too many. The bar turned him out and told him to go home. But William didn't go home. Drunk and angry, William raced back to the restaurant to give Henry a piece of his mind, only to find someone else waiting. Henry's daughter, Charlie, locked outside of the building, bullies laughing at her through the window. Fine, some other problem to fix. But then Afton got an idea. A beautifully awful idea. This was his chance to get back at the man that had humiliated him all those years ago. Henry had killed his business, and now Henry's robotic suit had killed his son. It was time for William to do some killing of his own. Let Henry feel what it's like to have something you love get ripped away. While parties continued inside the walls of the pizzeria, William attacked Charlie in the back alley. It felt good. He felt free. The years of resentment and bitterness trapped in his heart finally released in a moment of pure unapologetic evil. He would make Henry hurt like he hurts. In that moment, William became a killer. He dropped Charlie's lifeless body and drove home, forced to confront his family problems later that night, appalled, but also a little excited by what he had just done. Charlie's death would remain on the books as a random act of violence, and though Henry had suspicions about William, there was no physical evidence, nothing that could link him back to the crime. In the weeks that followed, Fredbear's family diner would close for good. 2 high-profile deaths around the restaurant with 2 grieving owners in such a short period of time was just too much bad press to handle. Besides, Freddy Fazbear's was still open, and it was the newer restaurant anyway. All the equipment from the diner, including the old yellow suits and security puppet, would get retired to that location, and there they would sit for 2 uneventful years. The rest of 1983 and 1984 were spent quietly grieving. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and the new cast of characters were a hit. Tragic memories of their yellow predecessors quickly faded. Afton kept a low profile and buried himself in work and research, quickly reaching Henry's level of engineering and even surpassing him. And while Henry slowed down to grieve, Afton kept going, even starting his own company, Afton Robotics, for all those pet projects that were a little bit too experimental for the regular operations of the pizzeria. The first of these experimental projects was a secret workshop under his house.
Wait, do you think Afton made like animatronics for other people? Like just sold them?
A veritable bunker, which allowed him to work while still monitoring his kids via hidden security cameras. 1983. A passcode that served as a constant reminder of why the cameras were so important, why he was down there in the first place. This was all to fulfill the promise that he had made to his son, right? I will put you back together. This was for him, all for him, right? But cameras weren't enough. He needed to solve the runaway Michael problem. He had to keep him in the house. He couldn't have another one of his kids wind up dead inside of an animatronic suit. So why not run a little experiment on Michael? You see, all this work with Henry had gotten Afton to start learning more about life, robots, the human mind, and what a fallible machine we as humans were. Our reality is so easy to manipulate with a few sensory deceptions. Deceptions like sound. With just a few sounds, he had discovered that he could alter a person's vision. He could transform blank, smooth plastic robots into lumbering, twisted
No, stop.
Nightmares far scarier than he could create with actual materials. They would appear organic, rotting, putrid, terrifying. These would be his means of keeping his son Michael in the house where he belonged. Was it extreme? Maybe. But then again, this was the boy who had killed his son. He would make him sorry. And so Michael would grow up not only dealing with the memories of his own guilt, the hospital room, the pills, the flowers, the death of his brother, but also facing literal nightmares, illusions created by sound. Michael would never forget these either. Years Years later, as a security guard, he would still draw pictures of them inside of his logbook. But all of these extra projects meant that his home life suffered even more. He was an absent father and a non-existent husband, leaving his wife cold and alone.
Why do you hide inside your walls when there is music in my halls? All I see is an empty room, no more joy, an empty tomb.
And despite her repeated demands that he leave his office and engage with the family, he refused time and time again, leaving her no choice but to leave.
You burned down my house?
You call that a house? It was like a morgue in there. You need to see your son.
The baby isn't mine.
Well, how's this? I'm keeping the diamond ring.
And through it all, there was one lingering feeling. William wasn't done. He had gotten a taste of what it felt like to be unleashed, what it felt like to be free. Charlie's murder had unlocked something in him, and he wanted more.
Wendy's has new saucy nugs.
Wendy's.
And if Wendy's found a way.
3 times in a row I've got your ad. I'm not getting no Wendy's. Not getting Wendy's.
June 26th, 1985. Putting on the golden Bonnie suit, he lured children one by one to the back room of the pizzeria when no one was looking. At first, he was cautious. He would lure them with promises of cake and cookies. He told them that their dog had died. He would ask for help with homework. Susie was the first. You never truly forget your first.
I was the first. I have seen everything.
But where to hide the bodies? He couldn't sneak out. Someone would see him. He had to hide them in a place where they'd never be found and where they'd never leave the building. They had to be stuffed inside of the suits. No one maintained those things anyway except for him. And so Susie would go into Chica. Fritz, Jeremy, and Gabriel would come next, but it was easy. It was too easy. And with each little life he snuffed out, his lies got bigger. Their house was burning. They're just being kidnapped. Until the last one where all pretense was off. He let himself get violent. Too violent.
I'll just wait for him after school, throw a bag over his head, hit him with a shovel, and drag him into the back of my car.
The body of Cassidy was far more bloody and broken than any of the others. He'd let himself go too far. That one he shouldn't have killed. With no more active animatronics left, he shoved the body into the one suit that remained backstage. The long-forgotten yellow Fredbear, now broken and discolored with age. Broken, like Cassidy was broken, like his son was broken. Newspapers reported on this disappearance, naming the whole thing the missing children's incident. Police would even charge William with the crimes after finding security footage of the golden mascot suit luring kids to the back, but they couldn't convict him. They had no bodies, and his face had been hidden behind the mascot suit the entire time. What they had was circumstantial at best, and so he walked away a free man. But Henry knew the truth. In these murders, he saw his daughter Charlie all over again, so he threw Afton out of the company and shuttered the doors to the old pizzeria. Henry would keep the franchise quiet for 2 years. This would not happen again. This could not happen again. How could he protect the kids? Finally, he developed a solution. He would implement an even more extreme security system in the form of new animatronics, toy animatronics, inspired by the toys that they had been selling years ago. But these guys, these were special. They were a new breed of robot with facial recognition abilities.
But most importantly, they're all tied into some kind of criminal database so they can detect a predator a mile away.
All the original animatronics, now withered with age, were moved to the new location. With a plan in place, it was time to try once more. The year was 1987, and the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was making headlines in local newspapers. Headlines that just so happened to catch the attention of William Afton. Freddy's was back, and without him, that was his idea, his character. Henry was, yet again, trying to cut him out of the picture. No. As long as these restaurants stayed open, William would always come back. Then he noticed the phone number to apply at the bottom of the article. $100 a week to apply, call. Afton would go back, not as an owner or co-founder. He would go back in the one place that they would least suspect him, a lowly day shift security guard. And there it was, buried in the back of parts and services, mixed in with the old withered animatronics, was the golden rabbit. With the yellow security badge still on his chest, he used his crank to pull open the spring locks. It was time for Bonnie to give an encore performance.
Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right. From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, especially concerning any previous employees. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. A position just became available.
1987, 5.
It's weird how he explains the how one of the suits was used. Like, one of the suits are used A yellow one.
More
it's
kids.
Weird.
He didn't know what felt better, getting back into the suit after 2 long years of waiting, or knowing how devastating this would be to Henry the next morning. He didn't even try to hide his crime this time, just meant more blood on Henry's hands. He'd failed to protect the kids again. The restaurant had only been open for a few weeks, but William was sure that this would get it to close. Good. If he
Man,
couldn't
they
have
just can't
Freddy's,
catch William.
no one would. Whenever a new pizzeria opened, he would be there. But as he sat in his bunker, something else started to linger in William's mind. He had seen something strange. The old withered animatronics, they had been wandering around the building, spurred on by the puppet. It was almost like those old robots were trying to save the kids. Save them? They couldn't, obviously, but still, how were they moving? It was almost like they had been given life somehow. Did he have something to do with that? The following day, the news would report a security guard getting bitten by one of the animatronics during the day shift. Was that bite meant for him? William's curiosity was stronger now than his bloodlust. He had to learn more, but how? There was no way he'd ever be able to get inside another Freddy's pizzeria. Heck, there was practically no way a Freddy's would ever open again. He needed to create something new, something brand new. He needed to create his own pizzeria.
Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
Circus Baby's Pizza World. This would be the place where he could continue his work. No longer just murdering, experimenting. He needed more kids, and he needed them alive. And knowing that he couldn't show his face on the restaurant floor, he needed a way of remotely capturing his victims and preserving them for his work. With that goal in mind, he designed a new breed of animatronic. Their endoskeletons fluid and flexible. He equipped them with sound lures that could mimic voices. They could isolate children. They could incapacitate and contain them with zero direct input from him. It was brilliant. He was brilliant. Far beyond the simple bars and wires of Henry's designs. And the characters he chose for this were uniquely his. His new roster wasn't going to be tainted by Henry's disgusting barnyard bird. Instead, it was back to his characters, his creations. Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, as well as 2 special ones. The first, Ballora, was an homage to the woman who left him. Now she would never leave him again. The second, the titular baby, was designed with his baby in mind. Elizabeth, his youngest child. She would always be Daddy's little girl, the one that listened to him, the one that obeyed until the day that she didn't.
Daddy, why won't you let me play with her? She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?
There is nothing like a Wendy's Frosty.
Wendy's.
It's cool. It's creamy. It's only $1 right now.
I don't want no Wendy's.
Wait,
Only
what?
I'm getting.
The one and only Frosty is $1? Gotta be Wendy's.
The day before Circus Baby's Pizza World opened, she disobeyed. She didn't listen. Left alone with Baby, she got too close. The animatronic ripped in half and swallowed her whole.
Yeah.
A scared and
next stream
confused child
is
fading into eternal darkness. By the time Afton found her, it was too late.
hopefully
She was gone.
Sarah's
He
missing.
immediately canceled the launch of Circus Babies under the
And then
guise of
try
a
to get
gas leak.
Simulacra.
But wait,
It's more
as he sat there at the foot of the
cost
stage, he noticed that something was different.
Only
The eye
$17
color of
to
the
get all
robot
3
had
games.
changed. Baby had been built with blue
in a
eyes,
bundle.
but now they were emerald green, the same color as Elizabeth's. Was she in there? Could this all be connected to the free-moving animatronics that he had seen at Freddy's? He had to know more. His mourning turned to excitement. He had to return to where it all started. 1993. Pathetic. This place was pathetic. Henry had clearly tried to reopen one final time with those old original animatronics from so long ago, but William's damage to the brand had been permanent. These things stank of death. They hadn't been washed in decades. But even if they had, nothing could wash away the stink of murder that haunted these halls. One night, then another, then another. William repeatedly snuck into the old broken restaurant to lure the living animatronics to him, one by one dismantling them, robbing them of their endoskeletons. The metal had to be the secret. It had to contain the remnants of life itself. But he had to know for sure. Leaping out of a room that was invisible to the animatronics programming, he dragged the oversized robotic skeletons back to his underground workshop, back to
Help Wanted,
where Circus Baby watched on with glowing, curious eyes. Eyes that somehow felt alive. Not knowing what else to do, William melted the robotic parts down. 5 animatronic endoskeletons reduced down to one silvery puddle of goo. Could he transfer this living metal to his own creations? He had to try. He picked up a syringe and filled it with the molten metal and injected the goo into Funtime Freddy's twisted, wiry endoskeleton.
Is it raining
suddenly,
outside?
the coils came to life, like snakes writhing in a pile. What
Oh
had once
no,
been
the wind
cold,
is just being
lifeless
super
metal moved and jolted on its own. He'd done it. He had unlocked the secret to life itself. Except something was clearly wrong. The movements were erratic. They were violent, angry. Baby didn't act this way. She had been calm, collected. This was clearly something else, something mindless and frantic. Perhaps by mixing the souls and then portioning them out, he had created incomplete beasts. He would need to keep testing to truly understand it. He needed more of this remnant. As he searched the old pizzeria one more time for any remaining scraps of metal, the ghosts attacked. His past victims come to collect their due, all led by Cassidy. The 5 lined up and blocked the door, and Afton's mind reeled. The scientific implications of this were incredible. Ghosts, real ghosts that he could see, all standing against him. But what could they do? What couldn't they do? He panicked as Cassidy approached. How do you stop something that's already dead? Maybe with the thing that resulted in their death in the first place. He would get into his suit like old times. He would regain his power over them just like the day that they died. He was the genius. He was the one in the suit. He was the one in charge. The spring lock snapped into place. Maybe it was his frantic movements. Maybe it was the leaky abandoned restaurant. Maybe it was just fate coming to collect its due. He didn't know. The only thing he did know was that his brain was suddenly filled with searing white-hot pain as hundreds of metallic pins and gears stabbed into his body from all sides. All he could do was collapse, blood slowly oozing out of the suit and pooling onto the floor around him. It couldn't end like this. It wouldn't end like this. His work was unfinished. Unable to move, his only option was to survive, to live, to keep living. It took days lying in his own blood, but eventually someone found him, a security guard making a normal report. When he saw the animatronics torn apart in the middle of the party room floor, it caused him to file an immediate report of a break-in. An owner would have to come in and claim the damage, and who else would it be other than Henry? Hope jumped in Afton's heart. Henry would see him. They were partners after all. He would be the one to help save him, to get him out of this suit, to relieve him from this tremendous pain. Henry entered the secret room. His eyes fell on Afton sitting there in the pool of red, and Henry, saying nothing, turned and walked away.
This is just to inform all employees that due to budget restrictions, the previously mentioned safe rooms are being sealed at most locations, including this one. Nothing is being taken out beforehand, so if you left anything inside, then it's your own fault. Management also requests that this room not be mentioned to family, friends, or insurance representatives.
And so there Afton would sit, hanging on for 30 years, trapped behind the walls with an iron will that refused to die. End of this part. I say this part because it's not officially the end of the Afton era just yet, but this just felt like a really solid stopping point, and the episode has gone on forever. Okay, so most of this is things that we already knew, stuff that's been established and reestablished time and time again by the game.
Yeah, but I want to hear the
there
whole
are
thing.
two things that I absolutely have to address. The first and biggest is the placement of sister location, or more specifically, Elizabeth's death. To me, evidence in game seems to suggest that it was meant to come before the crying child's death in 1983. The biggest clue to this is that the crying child saw something. Remember what you saw is the phrase that's repeated over and over again by psychic friend Fredbear, aka William Afton speaking through a walkie-talkie in the Fredbear plushie's stomach. But what did he see? Well, I think we can tell based on how the nightmare animatronics are visualized. They have mouths in their stomachs, just like Baby ripping in half at the waist to swallow a kid. There's also the empty girl's room, one presumably left behind by a dead sister. And lastly, it explains why he's scared, and more specifically why Afton wants him scared. He needs his kids to stay away from the animatronics. He doesn't want them getting too close because the last time one of his kids got too close to a robot, his daughter died. That's then why he sets up the nightmares, to scare both Mike and the crying child away from the animatronics from that point forward. That's why books like the Character Encyclopedia outright suggest that we play as the crying child in FNAF 4. That's why he has a nanny cam following the crying child everywhere, so he can keep tabs on his kids when they're out of his sight. He can't let another Elizabeth situation happen. The death of Elizabeth also gives William Afton extra motivation for killing. He's a grieving father. His daughter was taken away from him, so Charlie should die as well. He's lashing out at the world after losing his kids. And again, we know that at least one of his children had to have died prior to Charlie's death, based on the mound of dirt that we see in Midnight Motorist.
So, he originally said... I know, we are. But he originally said that
have died prior to Charlie's death, based on
this pile of dirt was connected to the book, The Twisted Ones, and these were the buried
the mound of dirt that
animatronics.
we see in Midnight Motorist. It also allows circus babies to open and close earlier in the timeline, which is how you wind up with Funtime Foxy appearing as Mangle in the FNAF 2 location. Basically, Elizabeth dying first has everything it needs to fit, except for the most important thing, the murder weapon. Why would Afton be building an animatronic with a giant claw in its stomach so early in the timeline? At this point, he just has no motive. It just doesn't make sense prior to 1983. At this point in the story, he hasn't killed anyone, and we know for a fact that the missing children's incident
Holy
is
crap, hold on. It just all of a sudden, it was like heavy wind. Now it's like raining super aggressive all of a sudden. Oh my god.
1985.
What?
So Elizabeth's death coming before any of those events just doesn't
Oh,
work.
hopefully there's no
Hence
lightning,
why I
at least.
placed it where I did in the narrative timeline. Afton's death here is also a bit tricky. We know that he returned to the FNAF 1 location to break down the original animatronics in order to harvest their remnants. We know that he melts down 5 things to become one thing. Candy Cadet makes that very clear. So the 5 things are the 5 endoskeletons from the various animatronics. That would be totally fine if it weren't for one huge problem.
Oh
On his
my
5th
God.
visit to the pizzeria, Afton gets spring locked. So either the 5 becoming 1 starts in 1993, but then finishes 30 years later when he reemerges from the wall to add the last endoskeleton to his pile, or he's had himself some reason to return to the original location after harvesting all the stuff that he can. It's not ideal, but it's the one angle that makes the most sense. And with that, this next chapter comes to a close, thereby leaving us with 5 more games to cover and another 40 plus years of Fazbear history to recap. When you put it that way, something tells me that this might balloon
Get
into
off
4
my
parts.
screen, Matt Pat. You stink.
Death is not an option.
I'm not gonna play Valorant again.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, and officially page 7 of the FNAF timeline script. Last time we covered the origins of Freddy's. We talked about William Afton's childhood.
We just watched this one.
I just solved the biggest mystery of FNAF 4. Recently, I released part 2 of our complete FNAF timeline. In it, I mentioned how FNAF 4's final boss, Nightmare, is almost certainly a blank animatronic with a malfunctioning sound illusion disc. That is a big claim to be making that I didn't have time to explain in that video, so now we're gonna do exactly that in under a minute. In the second FNAF novel, they make a big deal about these smooth-bodied animatronics that are able to turn into organic-looking monsters when sound illusion discs get activated. These are the twisted animatronics. So not only is there a parallel with Nightmare also being a smooth, blank animatronic, but now listen to Nightmare's jump scare. Unlike all the other characters with traditional roars in FNAF 4, Nightmare's jump scare is a computerized auditory sequence. It's almost like his sound illusion disc is malfunctioning, which is why we are able to see him as a blank robot. This is also why that final night starts with us fighting against Fredbear, but then ends with Nightmare. It's the same animatronic, but midway through the night, the sound disc starts turning off or outright failing. So really,
God, I said hopefully it doesn't thunder. It's thundering. Yo, it's just so dark in my room all of a sudden. God dang. There's a hurricane outside. I'll be alright.
Is our first example of the sound illusion discs being used in the game. Do I like it? Heck no. But you have to admit,
I give this 9. Hallelujah. Sorry.
hello, Internet. Welcome to Game Theory and page 20 of our final
I'm not gonna be Roblox YouTuber guy.
FNAF timeline.
Maybe sometime in the future I might stream it. If I run out of horror games, might play some, but I don't see that happening.
This is getting ridiculous.
Oh my
Last time we
god,
covered
it's Scraptrap.
William Afton's rise as a serial killer. How the loss of his young son in 1983 caused him to make one fateful promise that would ultimately serve as his driving force for decades. I will put you back together. Fueled by grief and obsession, Afton would lose himself in work and drinks. One night in a fit of rage, he lashes out against Henry's young daughter Charlie, his first murder. This moment becomes the first domino to fall in a long sequence of events that ultimately destroys William's life and the lives of those around him. That one murder gives Afton a taste for blood,
What's your theory, Scraptrap?
resulting in the deaths of 10 more children across 2 different pizzerias. Those children go on to possess animatronics, giving Afton his first exposure to Remnant and the potential solution for bringing his son back to life. The need to learn more about this miraculous power leads him to produce the Funtime animatronics, as well as their capture devices, robots designed to bring kids to him for experimentation and collection of more Remnant. Except there was one thing that he didn't account for: his daughter's curiosity. He made the robots too appealing, and it would cost him Elizabeth's life. Now with 2 children to put back together, Afton was more desperate and crazed than ever, returning to defunct pizzerias to steal the possessed metal still living inside their walls. What he didn't account for, though, were the ghosts, forcing him to pay for the sins of his past. When last we left him, William was spring-locked, bleeding to death behind a secret wall. Gone, but...
Why did William decide to work with Henry, even though he was going to kill Charlie?
Certainly not.
He wasn't planning on killing Charlie from the beginning.
Forgotten, as we're about to see in today's video. Today we're finishing up chapter 2 of our story,
He wasn't
wrapping
planning
up
on
the
killing
Afton
Charlie.
era. Over the next 6 pages, we switch our focus to the other main
we literally
character
just found this out. He wasn't planning on killing Charlie until his daughter died.
Mike, a young boy dealing
So
with the
he
fallout
fought
of a
Charlie,
stupid childhood
or not fought
decision
Charlie,
with
killed
tragic
Charlie.
consequences. A young man whose life is
gonna
best
fight
described
a
as
3-year-old.
collateral damage, caught in the blast radius of William's whirlwind of destruction. Now, before we begin, let me just rip off the band-aid now. We won't be finishing the timeline today. I know, I'm sorry, I wanted to, but covering FNAF VR, AR, and Security Breach wound up taking me an additional 9 pages of script. And I've already made you wait long enough for this part, so...
No, I don't... He killed kids before he was Springtrap. He killed, like, 10, 11 kids on purpose before he even became Springtrap.
I just had to make the executive call to break this one up into 2. Don't worry, that part is already written, it is already recorded, it is just in the process of being edited. It is a hefty episode. So mark it on your calendar, that one's actually going to be going live on March 25th. It's also coming complete with a live talk back where we go back over everything from the past couple episodes, as well as having ourselves some very special guests. So overall, that one should be a lot of fun. Fair warning though,
Alright, get to the video,
about discussion. Let's just say that you're either going to love that episode or it's a lot less controversial. Back. Weird. Michael knew his father sometimes traveled for work, disappearing for days on end, but usually there was some sort of notice, a phone call, a post-it, something. It's not like Michael and his father were close. Far from it.
No, he got a big nose though. Look at the size of his schnoz. Thing is huge. That's crazy.
With years of tragedy and loss, there was at least some element of communication between the two of them. They were united by a name and a shared pain. This time though, things felt different. William had left nothing. His absence was longer. There were no check-ins, no updates, just silence. Something had happened. If there was one thing Michael knew about his father, it was that he had contingencies, safety checks, backup plans. His father was a careful and guarded man. He held his cards close to his chest, and as such, William had prepared him in the event that something like this ever happened. Normally, his father kept his home office locked, but in the event of an unexpected, prolonged absence, Michael had been instructed to enter his father's office and look behind an empty set of shelves mounted in the corner of the room. Rolling his eyes, Michael entered the office. He never fully understood how William was able to spend so many hours of his days locked up in here. There was just nothing to do. Most of this place was empty. He dragged himself over to the shelf in the corner, expecting to find an emergency contact list, a family safety deposit box. But what he actually found there was completely unexpected.
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be.
The shelf swung open and revealed a giant industrial elevator, one that led straight down into an underground bunker. But that was impossible. Hidden inside his childhood home was a secret entrance to an enormous underground science lair? It didn't make any sense. Seriously, it didn't make any sense. And yet, here it was, mapped directly underneath the floor plan of the house that he'd grown up in, lost his brother in, been tortured in. Michael thought that he'd known his father, a prideful...
Wait a minute. So that leads down, and it's talking about how other workers used to work there? I think some people like randomly just stuck into the house just to get to work in there? It is pouring outside.
Sad, angry man with petty, everyday problems, but clearly he'd been living with a stranger this entire time. His father had secrets. Suddenly, the days of William being locked inside of his office made sense. He'd been here the entire time. Where was here, though? Was this Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals? The Circus Baby restaurant always did seem to be a deeply personal project for father.
Dang, well, the rain
failure
keep
of his
getting
cut unusually deep, especially after that first location had to be closed prematurely due to the gas leaks. After that day, father really did seem to change, to lose himself.
There is nothing like
I swear to God, if I get another Wendy's ad, I've got like 6 in a row. I just punched my laptop by accident.
Clearly, the entrance he had found was some sort of secret back way into the facility, one that required crawling through vents to navigate. His father had been working here, but in secret. Why? And that's when he found her. At the end of the facility, Circus Baby, his father's pride and joy. Except something was different about her. She wasn't like the others. The way she talked, the stories she told.
What looked tasty?
Something when he found crawling through. Clearly, father entrance his Circus Baby, his father's pride and joy. Except something was different about her. She wasn't like the others. The way she talked, the stories she told. This wasn't just a robot. She was alive somehow. And not only was she alive, she also felt familiar.
There is something bad inside of me. I'm broken. I can't be fixed. Will you help me?
Was this his sister? William's baby girl? But how? Why? What was this place? He dug around some old files and found blueprints outlining the features of these animatronics. Storage containers, voice mimicking, parental tracking. And was that a child in Freddy's stomach? Was his father collecting and experimenting on kids? Were all the rumors that he'd heard throughout his past actually true? That the animatronics came to life at night? That there were murders done in all the pizzerias? That his father had somehow been the prime suspect in all of it? Suddenly, Michael's mind flashed back to his persistent nightmares throughout his childhood. Had he been experimented on too? Tears stung in his eyes as anger, fear, and confusion filled his body. His father's secrets were pouring out. William wasn't just a lame...
I got a Dr. Pepper Slim Jim and not tasty. Sounds weird, but that's really good.
Overworked father. He was a monster, toying with life itself. Suddenly, everything clicked. He frantically looked around the room, blinking human heads on poles staring back at him. Green eyes, his sister. Blue eyes, his brother. Closed eyes, his mom. All just staring, expectantly. These were meant to be human. William was working down here trying to make believable humans, literally rebuilding the family that they had both lost. The small little girl robots with their British accents roaming the hallways of this underground facility suddenly took on a whole new context.
Hello in there. Is it the same person?
Were those meant to be his sister? A replacement for her? A clone? Was William building clones of his sister? They seemed to know him, after all, to react to his presence.
They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
He always did have a bit of a resemblance to his father. Michael's mind reeled as the reality of his...
I just want to say, I'm trying to think how old Michael would be.
Crumbled to dust. No, he had to get them out of there. If this really was his sister, heck, if any of these things were human, souls, whatever remnant of the humans that they once were, they needed to be rescued.
They always put us back inside. There's nowhere for us to hide here.
Led by the voice of Circus Baby, he marched through the now empty halls of the Funtime Auditorium. He would lead them. He would protect them. And finally, he would be able to forgive himself for the killing of his brother so many years...
You are in the scooping room now. The scooper only hurts for a moment.
Scooper? That violent extraction arm? Michael had seen that one in the pile of blueprints. Something about heat rendering the magical silver metal inside useless. In reality, prior to getting himself spring-locked and put behind the wall, William's methods had become increasingly sophisticated. With a mechanized arm that could infuse new bodies with a soul, William could finally give and take away life. The only thing he needed were the bodies. But William wasn't the only one looking for bodies, as Michael was about to learn.
But if we looked like you, then we could hide. If we looked like you, then we would have somewhere to go.
Michael was going to be the hero to help these animatronics, all right. He was going to help the haunted tubes and wires of these animatronics escape.
In fire.
Just not in the way that he anticipated.
Except for he's not fully dead. Because he's still in Help Wanted. Help Wanted 2. Same person. And Security breach.
His sister had lied to him. Another game of pretend. The scooper plowed forward, digging its extraction arm into his body. As he heard his bones ripping through his flesh, Michael blacked out.
But something is wrong with me. I should be dead.
Come on. Glitch trap. Security breach is that the giant, I don't remember what he looks like. Giant, spring trap in the basement.
But I'm not.
I was talking about William, not Michael. Oh, he said Michael. He said Michael, and I was thinking about William.
For the next several months,
I was talking about William after he said Michael.
For the next several months, Michael's life was not his own. He was forced to comply with a tangle of wires and spirits that lived inside of him. His body felt like an overfilled balloon begging to burst as day by day, week by week, his flesh began to sag
when he said
and
Michael, I
discolor.
thought
He was a walking, talking, rotting corpse, alive, but wishing he wasn't. He was a puppet, a walking shell. And while he did his best to conceal his fate, there was only so much a man filled with robot spaghetti could do. The entity in his innards would eventually leave, but by that point, the damage had been done. His decaying flesh stank, turning him into a literal purple guy. But still, even with no bones, even with rotting purple flesh and begging to die, Michael continued to live. That silvery metal remnant injected by the scooper meant that he couldn't die. His anger also refused to die. What he had seen down there in his sister's location had rocked.
Wait, that means he has to kill a child, stuff him in a suit, then melt that suit down. A lot.
Him to his core. His father had killed and captured dozens. His experiments had killed his sister and then tortured him throughout all his childhood. He was actively trying to build human replicants. He didn't know where his father was, but Michael knew that he was out there somewhere.
I've been living in shadows. There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you.
Michael had to correct for the sins of his father. He had to make things right. Michael would burn Fazbear Entertainment to the ground. I mean, what else could you do when your skin was permanently purple? Michael's strategy was simple. He would apply for night security guard positions at the old defunct pizzeria locations. That way, no one ever had to see him or smell him during his shift. And all these old, shuttered locations did need guards. Teenage vandals and squatters were always looking to get inside these abandoned buildings, and yet no one ever really wanted to work an overnight graveyard shift unless they were practically out of options. Enter Mike. One by one, he would take on the job of security guard, changing his name each time to ensure that no one was able to follow his paper trail. Once inside, he could tamper with the animatronics and figure out how they worked, writing about his experiences in his security logbook. While there, he would listen to the old tapes where upper management awkwardly welcomed new recruits to their summer jobs, even though he was working there nowhere near the summer months. He heard the gory details of his father's franchise from the outsiders looking in, confused and afraid about what was happening in the walls around them. Sometimes he would see his brother in the form of the Golden Freddy suit. It's me appearing on the walls around him. Except now, there was something else there. He was no longer alone. Another angrier presence was also in the suit, as if two spirits were forced to share the same body. And Golden Freddy would attack him now. It was aggressive. Its vengeance wanted to lash out at anyone with the Afton name, anyone who wore a security guard outfit. Over time, Mike worked his way through the old restaurants, the original pizzeria, the bigger, better Freddy Fazbear's. He spent weeks there looking for clues as to his father's whereabouts, and each time at the end of his week's shift, he would then set the location on fire. Remnant can't survive high temperatures after all. So burning away whatever spirit-laden animatronics that still existed inside seemed like a winning strategy. All this revisiting of his past, though, was causing the nightmares to begin again. Hallucinations that brought him back to his childhood. The guilt around killing his brother. His dreams were oddly mixed with the shrill phone calls of the security guards. But it would all be worth it in the end. The goal was to eventually stumble across the one location, the one job that would finally reunite him with his father. Little did Mike know that day would come sooner than he expected. 2023, an advertisement came across Mike's TV. Fazbear Frights, a new horror attraction inspired by the awful crimes that occurred around Freddy Fazbear's Pizza so many years ago. It made Mike sick. People looking to make a quick buck off the tragedy of others, off his own family. This wasn't a joke or entertainment. Regardless, he had to be a part of it. If this team was combing through his family's history, they might stumble across something that could be useful. And if his father was truly still alive as he suspected, there would be no way that he wouldn't show up here. Maybe finally, this could be the final chapter in his family's marathon of tragedy. Mike applied for the job and was immediately handed the keys. Years of doing this had taught him that security guards rarely receive thorough security checks. They also liked how creepy Mike looked. They thought it was a costume, on theme for the job. What little they knew.
Hey, glad you came back for another night. I promise it'll be a lot more interesting this time.
For weeks, there was nothing. But just as Mike considered giving up, he received the call that he'd been waiting for years.
I keep pressing pause when it's not. Can't you, night one of FNAF 3, keep just rebooting the animatronics all night long and win like that?
We found one, a real one.
Could this finally be him? Sure enough, there he was. William inside his iconic golden Bonnie Springlock suit, only now it was green and decaying with age. And there they were, a small family of broken men finally reunited. It's been a long time, Dad. Mike had always struggled with the phantoms of his past haunting him, but now all the animatronics he'd encountered over the past months, hopping from pizzeria to pizzeria, suddenly sprang to life, their burned faces haunting him as he tried to keep track of his father on the cameras. It would seem that William's mere presence had put the spirits on high alert. Ultimately, they were harmless, more annoying than anything else, but there was one that felt different from the others, one that was more than just a mere phantom, the security puppet. If he looked at the cameras at just the right moment, he could see it floating there through the halls. He could even see its reflection in the water pooled on the ground. It would seem like he wasn't the only one there on a mission. While he was dealing with Springtrap, Michael assumed that this one was likely dealing with the spirits of this place, finally setting them to rest. Hopefully this means a happier day for all of us, Mike thought to himself. And in that moment, he felt the air around him release, like pressure being let out of a bottle. The building sighed, as if 5 spirits had finally been allowed to move on. He had the sense that his brother was a part of them. He rigged the wiring inside the building to misfire, and the dry, desiccated walls erupted in flames. It is finished.
Bro just keeps making so much money. He's making money. He's making $100 per week, something like that. And then place burns down. Company gets insurance. They get money.
Except it was not. Somehow, through sheer force of will, Afton remained. He had survived, and Mike would need to find a new way of finishing off his father. Luckily, the solution would present itself later that year. Not from Mike, but from another victim that had been left in his father's wake.
We're talking about becoming a Fazbear Entertainment franchisee. Restaurant ownership and management. Something almost anyone can do with a limited degree of success. You are now the face of the newly rebranded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Fazbear Entertainment as a brand had been closed for years. William had been stuck in a suit and a wall. The only person who legally could bring the franchise back was Henry, but he'd largely pulled out of the franchise around the time of his father's disappearance. Something was up. Surely this had to be some kind of a trick, right? Mike, doing what he did best, applied for a franchise and immediately got the job. There was just one thing out of the ordinary. Paragraph 4.
If you are playing this tape, that means that not only have you been checking outside at the end of every shift, as you were instructed to do, but also that you have found something that meets the criteria of your special obligations under paragraph 4.
No employment contract he'd ever signed required him to keep special lookout for independently moving animatronics outside the restaurant. Now he knew something was up here. Henry was luring them all back. Rather than trying to go to them, like Mike had done for years, Henry was doing the opposite. He was putting them all under the same roof. He was finishing them off for good. Mike knew this wasn't meant to be a restaurant. It was meant to be a prison, a containment vessel, a locked box meant to trap them all in so they could finally end the madness. It took a few nights, but eventually everyone was there. His father, the puppet, the robot spaghetti that had once violated his body, and his sister, now hopelessly devoted to serve the man that had once gotten her killed. It was time. He had been instructed to seal the doors and leave, but while he locked everything down, he didn't move on. If this was truly meant to be the end, if the remnant needed to be washed away, he needed to be a part of that.
This is where your story ends. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace and perhaps more waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, old friend.
And with that, it was over. The Afton legacy died with all of them trapped inside of a literal box. As the flames danced around the office, Mike, for the first time in decades, was happy. But William wasn't gone yet. Although the darkest pit of hell was open and waiting for him, something or someone wouldn't allow him to move on. Instead, he found himself locked in moments from his past. The pizzeria, his son's room, his underground bunker. It was as if his brain's neurons were all firing at once, overloaded, mixing and matching all his biggest fears, regrets, failures. What was this place? How did he get here? He called out into the silence. Then they started coming. Without warning, animatronics, both new and old, began to jump out at him, bite him, rip him limb from limb. The pain was immeasurable. Make it stop. Make it stop. William, for the first time, longed for death, an end to this torture. Just as it felt like he couldn't take it anymore, everything was quiet again. It was as if the world had been reset. There was a brief moment of quiet, and then the onslaught began again. Dozens of faces from his past all focused on him. A waking nightmare that he couldn't escape from. More pain, more ripping. It was his own personal hell, but why? Why couldn't he just die? And then he saw them, a group of characters he never thought he'd see again. Those janky, stolen characters that had started everything. The mediocre melodies. It had all started to go wrong once they showed up. Once Henry had made them. But mixed in with their obnoxious southern drawls, William heard something else. It was barely a whisper, but he could just make out the words.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
That voice. He knew that voice, but from where?
Greetings from the fire, and from the one you should not have killed.
The one he shouldn't have killed. William thought back. He'd done a lot of awful things, but there was always the one that stood out. Not Charlie, his drunken act of revenge. Not Susie, his first true murder, no. Instead, it was the one that he had lost control with. The one that he had broken beyond repair for no good reason other than because he could. The one that he'd stuffed inside the golden bear that his partner used to wear. Cassidy. They were back, and now they were trying to punish him, to make him suffer like he'd made them suffer. It was almost like William and Cassidy's souls had been locked together, fused by a collective rage and spite, each refusing to move on. But while Cassidy was so focused on taking revenge, they actually did the one thing that would be the downfall for so many others. They kept William alive. Even though fire should have destroyed the remnant that was coursing through his being, Cassidy kept William breathing, paving the way for his escape. William's will was so strong, his soul so powerful that he managed to put a part of himself inside the circuitry that housed the spring-lock suit. And there, his consciousness lay, inside a single circuit board, waiting for someone to find him and set him free. A person that no one would suspect. Okay, so a bit of a shorter chunk, but an important one as we shift perspectives to Mike and tell his side of the story. And with FNAF VR, AR, and Security Breach having so much to explain, I didn't want to rush through things by trying to cram it all in here. Don't worry, I know you've all been patient. The final video is happening on March 25th. That is locked, it is getting ready to go. Trust me, I want this thing to be over and done with as much Orville elephant in the room, Mike's quest for revenge. You might have noticed that I was vague about the dates, and there's a good reason for that. I don't know them. There is no good way for me to make them fit in. Here's what I do know. We know with a high amount of certainty that Michael Afton is the character that we play as up until Ultimate Custom Night. Mike Schmidt and Fritz Smith, the security guards for FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 respectively, get fired for, quote, tampering with the animatronics and odor. So weird connection between the two of them, right? But now, look at the phantom animatronics that are haunting us in FNAF 3. They use models from both FNAF 1 and FNAF 2, meaning whoever is sitting in that security guard chair, Fazbear Frights, they have to have seen both locations and their animatronics. And that's not all. Their designs are burnt. It's a weird detail in the game, and it's something that the character encyclopedia repeatedly calls attention to. The burned texture for these phantom animatronics. Why is that so unusual though? Fazbear Frights is the first time in the franchise that we hear about anything burning down. From that point on in the story, it's like the characters turn pyro and are suddenly setting fires left and right. But for the first 3 games, nothing ever catches fire. The animatronics are just moved or repurposed in some way. So when did they burn? And why would our security guards see them as being burned? Someone has to have been going location to location, setting these places on fire, purging the sins of the past. We know we're definitely playing as Mike and sister location in FNAF 6 based on the in-game dialogue. And in FNAF 4, there's an Easter egg where we can hear the phone call from night 1 of FNAF 1, meaning that whoever's in that bedroom has heard the recording as a security guard. We also know that Mike has seen the nightmare animatronics based on his drawings in the security logbook. So overall, there is solid evidence that connects all of FNAF's 1 through 6. You'll also notice how the character encyclopedia doesn't have a page for Mike Afton. This thing has a page for Chocolate Bunny Bonnie, but not Michael. Some tells me they don't want us to confirm how many games he's been in, because that would confirm too much of the theory. In short, this gives us an incredibly compelling and complete narrative. Mike as our protagonist, and William his...
Chocolate Bonnie. That's not lore. That's not
father as our antagonist. Mike accidentally kills his brother in Fredbear's mouth, which begins our story and sets William down his pathway of destruction. Mike is then haunted by the guilt of his past and is looking to make things right across the rest of the games. In Sister Location, he learns what his father's been up to and realizes what he has to do to correct it. After failing to finish the job in FNAF 3, he ultimately helps Henry end it all in FNAF 6. It is great. It is a clean narrative. There is just one problem: timing. Mike's quest can't really start until he's been down to Sister Location, seen Baby, and gotten himself scooped. That's when he finds out about Afton's secret life. It's also when he's gonna start to smell, because, you know, he's a walking, talking, rotting corpse. And we know that he's not going down into the bunker until the Funtime animatronics have been made, Freddy's has been closed, and Afton is out of the picture. That all should be happening post-1993, after William is sealed behind a wall. But that then presents us with a few problems. Afton has already dismantled the original animatronics as we see in the FNAF 3 minigames. How are those things getting burned if they're already deconstructed? But more importantly, we see FNAF 2 paychecks with the date 1987. That is way earlier than I think it can be. To be fair, Fritz Smith's pink slip on night 7 doesn't have a date, but it's a bit weird to say that the first few nights are in 1987 and then employee number 3 is hired on years after the restaurant closes. Anyway, just wanted to call that out because I don't have a solid answer for it, and I'd love to see your comments down below. And with that, my friends, this chapter comes to a close. We'll see you on March 25th for the grand solves what those games were trying to tell us.
I'm not waiting a whole year. It is August.
10 fleas can turn into a $250,000 in just 1 month.
Okay, it's a timeline. I watched this one. I was gonna skip it.
Hello, Internet!
It's timeline.
Welcome to Game Theory, and the final part of my FNAF timeline where today...
Hold up. Why was he streaming on GT?
You can only get Wendy's new saucy nugs at Wendy's. So if anyone ever tries to tell you they have saucy nugs at home, you might want to see what else they're hiding, because that person lies. For a whole new way to nug, gotta be Wendy's.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, and the final part of my FNAF timeline where today we're bringing our story to a close by talking about the most complicated and controversial part of the timeline, the part that I've been dreading most.
Just letting you know, I'm gonna have to stream until 3 p.m. for you in order to finish this whole series today.
Most of all,
so we all gotta sit here for another 4 hours.
The end. The moment where we're finally forced to come to some definitive and difficult answers trying to explain what the heck we were watching in Security Breach. The last 2 episodes have been about death. The death of Afton's family, the deaths of multiple children, the death of the franchise itself as Mike and Henry figuratively and literally burn it all down. Today's episode, though, and the current end of this franchise, is instead all about rebirth. The return of old characters in new forms, and the controversial rebirth of a franchise.
1 second. 1 sec. Let's finish tomorrow. I work around 12. Tomorrow. Alright, so we'll do it whenever. Yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna pull this up on my phone real quick. Something else. One second. Alright. Let me do this real quick. Sorry. Alright. Yo, it's not loading. I'm trying, guys. I'm sorry. Just won't even load. Come on. Please load. There we go. Oh wait, wrong thing.
Entering the next era of its story. But before we hop into the timeline, due to scheduling conflicts, I won't be able to have any live talk back after this episode. I know, I promised one, I was really excited about it, but I just couldn't make it work with my schedule and all the other guests' schedules. That said, I still do plan on doing one over the coming weeks with special guests. Just make sure that you're subscribed and either have all notifications turned on, or you're just watching our community tab for the announcement as to when that's gonna happen. And now, without any further ado, we finally reach the end and a new beginning to our story. Fazbear Entertainment was dead.
There is no need for you to return to work next week, as Fazbear Entertainment is no longer
Yes,
a corporate entity.
We're gonna watch this one, and this one possibly. If you got time.
All debts had been paid, all assets redistributed. The company was outright dissolved. Even the memories of the horrors that had happened there started to fade away in the public consciousness. The people were gone too. William was dead. Henry was gone. A whole generation of young Emilys and Aftons had lost their lives to the horrors of the pizzeria. All of them collateral damage to the man in the bunny suit. Everyone the company had ever touched was dead and gone. Well, all except one.
Pay your child support, you deadbeats! I'm keeping the diamond ring. I also set the house on fire!
Clara Afton. She'd been there in the early days, back when things with William were good. They'd had the perfect home, a thriving business, the ideal family, but shortly after their youngest son died,
I don't know what that noise was.
William had become distant, lost in his work, obsessive. She had
Yo,
watched
why are
him
her
change.
arms so long? Hold up.
Started to change. William had become distant, lost in his work, obsessive. She had watched him change from this irritatingly brilliant man that she had fallen in love with to a drunken monster struggling to hold himself together. And despite her trying to reach out to him in those desperate days, he was just too far gone.
Admit it, you wanted to let me in.
For her sake, she had to leave the relationship, and from there she largely faded into obscurity. A mystery from William's past, a footnote in his history, and that was fine for her. She wanted to leave that part of her life behind. She tried to move forward, never wanting to hear the name Freddy Fazbear again, a time defined by mistakes and broken promises. But then, the paperwork started to arrive. As Fazbear Entertainment began to close as a corporate entity, suddenly her mail was flooded with notifications, requests, obligations. She had been there since the beginning, helping William in the early days of his business, and now, as a shareholder and sole living member of the Afton family, all copyrights and trademarks of both Afton Robotics and Fazbear Entertainment passed on to her. Memories of this past life that she had long left behind. Looking at the blueprints, the contracts, the memos, she felt old wounds begin to reopen, the regrets of a happy family that had been torn away from her. William had always been brilliant. That's what had attracted her to him in the first place. But he'd also been too blinded by obsession and pride. He was too jealous, too petty, too unable to actually see a bigger picture. But now, holding the paperwork that contained decades of heartbreak and trauma, she realized it was her turn. She was holding the power. This was her chance. And one thought resonated in her head. I will put them back together. I will put them all back together. She would be the one to rebuild this family, to rebuild the pieces of that shattered life, to reclaim the kids that Fazbear had stolen from her. But how? Looking at William's work now laid out before her, she knew that he had been onto something, collecting remnant, robotic humanoids, digital conscience transference. The pieces were all in place, they were just scattered, fragmented. It was almost like there were too many ideas going in too many different directions. It was such an important idea that she reiterated that point to herself. There were too many ideas going in too many different directions. That said, there had to be a way to save it all. She just needed to put it all back together. But how? To rebuild her family, she would first need to rebuild the franchise that had stolen them away from her. With ownership over the characters, their licenses, the technology patents, and the Fazbear name, she converted the corporation back to an LLC, a structure for smaller businesses that are usually family-owned. The irony was fitting. From there, she would need Remnant, and lots of it. Remnant was the key. Clearly, in the later years of his life,
like I've been talking about, the Remnant, they gotta kill a child, put it in the endo suit, wait for it to do whatever it does to take control of the animatronic, and then melt
William
that
had been using
animatronic down.
Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals as a remnant farm, sending robots to kids' birthday parties in the hopes of nabbing bits of the stuff here and there. But clearly, it wasn't enough. He had, what, like 4, maybe 5 animatronics going out every week? No. It was a decent idea.
Walk in for all your favorites during Little Caesar's Summer of Hot and Ready. Like a thin
No
crust pepperoni
Little
pizza for
Caesars.
$7.99.
Man, I don't
but
want
to get the
pizza.
remnant it required,
No.
it needed scale. Dozens, hundreds of animatronics all out there, all gathering remnant from unsuspecting customers. But to do that would require help, something William would never ask for. William had kept everything in-house. His obsession with control limited him. Clara, though, she wasn't nearly that precious. A plan like this required partners, people outside of Fazbear to do the heavy lifting. So she contacted a mid-sized delivery company, DLZ Shipping Solutions, to help build replicas of all the original animatronics. And with meal delivery apps being all the rage, why not an animatronic delivery service? Order one to celebrate your birthday, your Halloween party. How about a 4th of July picnic? We'll invite Liberty Chica and 4th of July Freddy on over. She would make sure that they made skins for every occasion. Chocolate Bonnies for Easter, Shamrock Freddies for St. Patrick's Day, Dia de los Muertos Chicas. And thus,
those are
the
not
Fazbear
lore-wise.
Funtime
Those
Service
can't be
was
actually
born.
That's right. With the Fazbear
That's
Funtime
Markiplier.
Service, you'll never be alone again. You'll always have someone watching you.
What is Markiplier doing here?
Absolutely. Was it a sellout?
Or Icicle
No
Freddy.
doubt. It was exactly the sort of thing that William would have hated, but it needed to be done to get enough remnant. Normally, the novelty of ordering an animatronic wore off after like what, 1, maybe 2 times? But with new skins for new holidays, suddenly you had yourself an animatronic perfect for every occasion. It would
17
keep
hours
people
of
hooked. It would keep them
cutscenes?
ordering the latest and greatest that Fazbear Entertainment
Jeez.
LLC had to offer, and all the while they'd be collecting and returning the remnant back to her. In a word, it was brilliant. There was just one problem with it. No one trusted the Fazbear name. The company's brand was still mud in the public eye. No one would want to hire animatronics from the restaurant franchise known for murdering children. Nothing kills a party quite like the threat.
It's crazy that the FNAF, the Freddy's places, or Freddy, whatever the places are called, I keep forgetting.
Animatronics from the restaurant
Fazbear Entertainment's
franchise
is still open because
known
it just
for murdering children. Nothing kills a
constantly.
party quite like the threat of death, you know. So she needed to find a way to discredit the stories that had come before. She needed to win back the public's affections, reactivate some nostalgia for the spooky stories of their childhoods. She needed a game. Multiple games, in fact.
They lied to us. They lied to all of us.
Excuse me.
They told
My
us
bad.
that the whole point of this VR game was to undo the bad PR done by a rogue indie game developer. But that's not true at all. Those indie games were designed to conceal and make light of what happened. This isn't just an attempt to rebrand. It's an elaborate cover-up.
Struggling game developers were a dime a dozen online, most working on their magnum opus
Oh.
between shifts at the Dollar General. So she found one. Steve
Ow.
just picked him out of obscurity, the right mix of desperate and doofus willing to say and do anything for a couple extra bucks. And he fell right in line, as expected, delivering stupid little things with dumb generic names like Mangle's Quest, Balloon Boy's Air Adventure, Five Nights at Freddy's. Bad gameplay with even worse graphics, but hey, they got the job done. People were suddenly talking about the clues inside of these things, searching for the hidden lore. They were actively making jokes about dead kids at pizzerias. Her husband's twisted history of serial murder had suddenly been reduced to a mere Nancy Drew mystery to be solved. The plan had worked. Freddy Fazbear's was suddenly more popular than ever. Things were going shockingly well. Her takeover and reboot of the franchise was full and complete. Suddenly infused with cash, she built the largest, most ambitious project yet, the Mega Pizzaplex. William had always been so visionary, but always thought so small scale. It was
I gotta wonder when the Mega Pizzaplex was made, because that thing is really advanced. Because if the third game was made in 2033,
careful to a fault.
has to be
Not her,
made
though.
at like 2050.
She knew that this latest project needed to be big. It needed to be flashy. It needed to be a palace for children. A place that got people talking and checking out the latest in Fazbear products. So with a steady supply of remnant flowing in, it was finally time. The stage was set. It was time to get to her real goal, literally rebuilding a family.
That's like basically
March
what's happening.
2035.
Or
the first was obvious.
Michael has been like freeing the souls of his family.
Crying child, her little boy,
Michael,
the one that was the first to get ripped away
William,
from her. She'd
his
seen
sister,
down in his bunker that William had gotten very close to
brother,
replicating artificial humans using animatronic technology.
Ow.
So that's exactly what she would do. Rebuild her boy from the ground up using robotic parts. His shaggy brown hair, his favorite striped shirt, even down to small details that no one would notice, like the band-aid on his left knee. William's research had even found ways...
Be it the happiest ending and the bad ending are both
of making animatronics that could bleed and process food, making them virtually indistinguishable from a typical human. He would never have any idea of what he actually was unless he was explicitly told. The only things that could possibly ruin the illusion were any overrides to his internal systems. If something were to, say, interfere with the cameras that he had in his eyes, or cause some sort of a core reboot to his hard drive, or x-ray his metallic bones, then yeah, he would be exposed. But otherwise, to the outside world, he was just your typical, normal human boy. She worked down in the bowels of the Pizzaplex, giving him life, but it was one thing to build him, it was another to help him remember his identity. He died so young, so early in their history that there was no preserved memories for him, no documentation that she could just download into his digital brain. So bit by bit, she trained him, forcing him to remember who he was. In a corner of the room, she even made a makeshift dinner table, a reminder of their happier days. The family recreated: 2 brothers, a sister, a father, and the mother at the head of the table. The one in charge, the one in command, the one bringing all of this to fruition. But his progress was admittedly slower than she would have liked. At first, he could only communicate through simple ones and zeros, then rudimentary drawings and crude letters. But bit by bit, images of his past life started to come through. Balloons, colors, houses, bears and faces, birthday parties, all for me. Gregory was alive. As the robot boy embraced her, she felt a warmth that she hadn't in decades. This was the joy that she'd been working towards. This was what it was all for. Her son back in her arms again. The plan was working. She had to keep going. Next was William. If the family was truly going to be put together, she would need him. And she knew exactly where he was, in the ruins of that old Freddy Fazbear's pizza place where Henry had trapped him. In fact, that's specifically why she insisted on building the Pizzaplex there over the sinkhole. It was the best place to hide what her true intentions were with the entire operation. Digging through the wreckage, she found him. He was right where she thought he'd be. Seeing the putrid shell of the Springtrap suit, though, was not something she was prepared for. The rotting corpse of William Afton was disgusting. Scorched flesh fused into the fur lining. Hollow black sockets where eyes once were. A smell that reeked of burned carbon and bloody iron. He was no longer flesh. It was just the tangled sinews of a creature that was once called human. How far this brilliant man had fallen. It was clear that her work was cut out for her on this one. Afton was practically lifeless. The man may not have been able to die, but he was about as close as you could come. And his body would need a lot of reconstruction. Replacement arms and endoskeleton reinforcements were the top priority. Maybe pulled from their new line of glam rock animatronics. She'd have to see if they had any spare Bonnie parts lying around that they could steal. In the meantime, though, she threw the...
I always kind of wondered why they didn't have like extra spare parts for Bonnie.
Husk that was once her husband into a life support pod
and just get rid of the gator.
Used with aerosolized remnant to help keep him stable. But more important than recovering his body was recovering his mind. In his current state, he was comatose, an empty shell. Severe brain damage starts at temperatures over 108 degrees Fahrenheit. 42 degrees Celsius, and years of repeated fires had burned his brain to goo. Gone was the brilliant, frustrating mind that had drawn her to him in the first place. But she had a plan. Unlike her darling boy Gregory, Afton had found ways to record his consciousness. Fundamentally, the brain is only a series of electrical connections after all, so why couldn't you replicate that in the form of a standard circuit board? In essence, you could create a digital consciousness. And one thing she knew about William, he was nothing if not cautious. A planner, someone who had backup up plans to his backup plans. And sure enough, there it was, buried in piles of old animatronic CPUs, a record of Afton himself. But she needed someone to test it.
Someone was definitely here during the night. It had to have been the client. I mean, they sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation, told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves.
Unlike the other games that she'd paid to have made in the past, this one had a different purpose. This wasn't about PR, it was about getting William back up and running, spreading his virus to the masses.
You acknowledge that Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for accidental digital consciousness transference, real-world manifestations of digital characters.
She hired a new developer, Silver Parasol Games, to scan the boards and bring her husband into the system. And because of the immersive nature of VR, William's consciousness would be able to merge with the player, giving him a new body, a new agency. There was just one complication. Afton's hold wasn't as powerful as she had hoped. He wasn't able to gain complete control. The first trial run, Jeremy, was so desperate to escape from his grasp that he sliced his own face off with a paper shredder. Messy. Afton's followers were reluctant, to say the least, but it was the second attempt that looked
cut your face
like
off
it had the potential to kill two birds with one stone. Enter Vanessa. Mrs. Afton wanted a surrogate daughter. Her darling Elizabeth would have been a young woman at this point if she had lived. And Clara wanted someone who wasn't Elizabeth but could be just like her. Could she have just rebuilt her like Gregory? Sure, but she decided against it because she wanted an actual human mother-daughter connection. Well, that, and it would be redundant and narratively unsatisfying to have two robot kids in the same family. What could she say? William had put a lot of tools on the table for her to use, and she was planning on using them all. Plus, Elizabeth had always been so loyal to Daddy. It was time to give her a second chance, a true choice. And Vanessa seemed to be the perfect candidate to fill the role.
Your dad's name was Bill. Your dad didn't play fair, did he? He used to make your mum look bad in court. He manipulated you. I know your mum after she lost the custody case. I was supposed to be a good girl.
She started as a QA tester at Silver Parasol Games, a VR game development company that was part of her plan to bring back William. But more importantly, Vanessa checked all the correct boxes. Right age, blonde, green eyes with a fondness for flowers and the outdoors. In many ways, it was her daughter all over again. Except it wasn't just looks and personality. What really mattered was Vanessa's mind. Underconfident, coming from a broken home, motherless, able to be manipulated. Yes, she would do nicely. She would be the one to save dear old Daddy, just as the real Elizabeth would have wanted.
I will make you proud, Daddy.
While testing the VR game, William's digital consciousness merged with Vanessa. Oh sure, she fought, fragmenting Afton's code into a series of tapes hidden across the game, trying to do web searches to regain control over her life, but it wasn't enough. She was weaker than Jeremy. She was a thrall that, despite occasional moments of lucidity, had to obey. And with Vanessa, it was a 2-for-1 deal. She was getting a daughter back, while also bringing her husband one step closer to reactivation. She just had to make sure that Vanessa was headed the right way.
Wendy's has new saucy nugs. And if Wendy's found a way to make their nugs even better, anything is sauceable! For a whole new way to nug, gotta be Wendy's.
The reborn Gregory was an expert hacker, part of the benefits of being an Afton and a robot, so Clara had him keeping tabs on Vanessa, hacking into her emails and trailing her therapy sessions to ensure the future Elizabeth was falling in line. If any of the therapists started to ask too many questions, they were promptly dismissed from their positions. And while Gregory kept tabs on Vanessa's personal life, Mrs. Afton made sure to clear a path for her professionally. With Silver Parasol's collapse at the hands of the Anomaly, she then had the possessed Vanessa bring the contaminated circuit boards to DLZ shipping and the Fazbear Funtime service. More glitches, more Remnant, more Afton. But it was her last move that was the best. In a true masterpiece of poetry, she brought Vanessa over to be Chief Security Officer at the Pizzaplex. A true family tradition to don the hat and badge, and all it took was a recommendation from the top as well as some emails marked for deletion. Sure, Vanessa didn't have relevant experience for the job, but when it comes directly from the CEO, does it really matter? Husband, son, daughter. A corpse, a robot, a human. All that was left was Michael. Poor, troubled Michael. The boy that killed her youngest. The one that would spend years trying to make his guilty conscience right again. A self-professed protector. While she knew she needed him to complete the family, something told her that the problem had already solved itself. Something had shifted when using Glamrock Freddy to excavate the buried pizza place.
I have been here before. I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I have changed. My friends are here, but I can protect you. I am not on me.
Maybe it was the remnant that had coursed through Michael's veins. Maybe it was the spirit of Michael living on as a protector. But he was there, somewhere inside of Glamrock Freddy. She could feel it. And just like that, she'd won. She'd done it. Sure, there were still some kinks to work out, some final brainwashing of Vanessa, some rehabilitation of William, but they were there. Finally, all together again under one roof. The Aftons reunited. A happy ending. And that's how it could have ended. That's how it should have ended, had it not been for a few unanticipated developments. For one, something was just wrong with the Pizzaplex. Almost as if the entire building was haunted, possessed. Puppet plushies hiding on ceilings, behind crates, places that they had no earthly way of belonging. Staff bots with greasy tears down their eyes acting like they were being puppeteered by some sort of a nightmare. Even their sounds had the echo of nightmares long past. It was as though a guardian spirit of the past refused to move on. As long as her husband was around, it too would linger. Only now, it wasn't just in one body, but it was in the essence of the building itself. She had seen stories of houses built on burial grounds getting possessed by angry spirits, but she'd never assumed that it could be real. Then again, in a world of living spirit metal and mind-controlling glitches, who was she to be so judgmental? The whole thing was ridiculous. Why would this be the line that she refused to cross? After all, the Pizzaplex was built over the burial ground of angry spirits, but it was the power cords that finally convinced her that something was wrong. Suddenly, these cords were striped black and white, like the security puppet from generations ago. The very foundations of this place, the materials and wires that constituted it were rebelling against her, against the Aftons, against the quest to bring them all together again. And it was being helped by something else, something slithering through the building. Maybe they were connected, she couldn't be sure, but a blob of living wires could be heard oozing through the walls, stealing pieces and parts of the old animatronics showcased in Rockstar Row. She could only assume that it was a byproduct of all the remnant they'd been collecting. From Afton's testing, she knew that both light and dark remnant existed, one of positive emotions and the other created from anguish, anger, agony. Perhaps this thing was an amalgamation of all the darkest parts of the pizzeria's history, a collection of the hatred still housed inside these defunct endoskeletons and exosuits. As long as it was left alone, it seemed to be harmless. But if any Afton outside of Michael got too close, it would lash out wildly. Even young Gregory, looking to punish the family that had been complicit in its horrible creation.
I keep pushing the space bar.
Little did she know, though, that Gregory should have been her biggest concern, that bringing the family together would have some unforeseen consequences. Gregory was normally the goodest of boys. She had literally built him that way. But lately, he'd been disappearing more and more often, disobeying her orders, requests. She knew that he loved playing on the arcade machines once the Pizzaplex closed, being so good as to top the leaderboard on practically all of them. But lately, he was nowhere to be found. She suspected his absence had to do with Glamrock Freddy's failed performance the other night, when he malfunctioned live on stage. Almost as though the core programming of Freddy responded to seeing this rebuilt small boy. Almost like it awakened something inside of him. She'd have to make sure that Vanessa was on the lookout for him. But she'd soon come to learn that Vanessa wasn't enough. Whether it was the influence of the nightmare puppet or a reawakened hatred of animatronics seated deep in Gregory's code, something had caused him to rebel, to rip apart each animatronic in the Pizzaplex. Bit by bit, this boy was tearing down the empire that she'd so painstakingly built, freeing Vanessa from her mind control, destroying the remains of Afton in the basement, setting Glamrock Freddy loose. As her carefully created world crumbled around her one more time, she began to plot her revenge. She would have to bring them all to ruin. And there you have it, my friends, nearly a decade in the making, my FNAF timeline for where the franchise is here in 2023, the year of Fazbear Frights, by the way. As always, it wouldn't be right for me to finish without going over some of the more controversial takes that I just handed out. I think we can all agree that this part of the timeline was always going to be the hardest, so let me just break down some of the major points. First of all, the biggest swing of this episode, and obviously the one that everything else rests upon, Mrs. Afton being the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment LLC. Here's why I went with this route. Now, first and foremost, the head of Fazbear Entertainment is the single biggest mystery that we're meant to solve at this point in the lore. The Ultimate Guide brings it up repeatedly. Who's running the show? Who is okaying these decisions? And in the security breach memos, we get multiple mentions of someone manipulating things from the top down. Whoever this is, they are the person driving forward every other facet of late-stage FNAF lore here. They're the puppet master who's hiring the indie dev. They're the ones relaunching the brand, building the Pizzaplex over the burial ground. So everything at the end of the timeline relies on this one one singular answer. Now, as I see it, there are two possibilities here. One, an adult robot Elizabeth, like we see older versions of robot kids in the fourth closet, or Mrs. Afton. Could it be someone completely new to the franchise? Absolutely yes, but in a game with so many returning faces and repeating themes, it would be pretty random and arbitrary. So, between these two girl bosses, who then would it be? Well, Elizabeth always wants to please her daddy, so she'd be most likely wanting to bring him to life. But then, what's Vanessa's role in all of this? Vanessa is clearly meant to be a parallel for Elizabeth. Same hair, same eyes, similar backstories, but if the main goal is getting the Afton family back together, which seems to clearly be the case in Security Breach, then there's no need for Vanessa to be involved at all. We already have Elizabeth running the show. It would also mean that we suddenly have two robot kids running around, which feels narratively repetitive and quite frankly kind of dumb. Now look at Mrs. Afton. We know next to nothing about her outside of any clues that we can get from Immortal and the Restless and Bellora's song. But what her being head of Fazbear does is make every other piece of the lore fit. Suddenly, you can have one of every other type of character. One robot kid in Gregory, one brainwashed human in Elizabeth/Vanessa, one OG corpse in William, and one possessed animatronic in Mike. Narratively, it makes everything else cleaner. Legally, it's also the option that makes the most sense. As I call out in my narrative, she'd likely have some stake in the original company and all of its assets. So as Fazbear folds as a company, I'd suspect a lot of it would return back to her. But there was one clue that really sold me on this particular direction, and that was this right here, in the Post-it room. The big lore central of Security Breach, a dinner table scene with the whole family, including the mother. And not only is she there, she is at the head of that table, the position of highest honor and responsibility. She is the one in charge, with William being relegated off to the side. That one scene shows that we have to include Mom in there somewhere, and the only place it makes sense for her to be is at the top. Now, there is one big dilemma with my interpretation of all this. The Ultimate Guide really seems to point out that the head of Fazbear doesn't want the glitch trap virus to spread. They call out one particular email in FNAF AR where the legal team calls a cease and desist to all action about scanning the circuit boards. And even in FNAF VR, we're told that the circuit boards get stolen back by the client, presumably once they realize what danger is on there, trying to stop glitch trap before he spreads and gets out of hand. Here's the problem with that though. If the head of Fazbear doesn't want Afton to rise again, why'd they restart the company in the first place? Why'd they build over the FNAF 6 pizzeria? Why'd they go through an elaborate cover-up to make the possessed Vanessa an important part of the company? Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It would be the most inconsistent series of actions ever, but I did want to call attention to it since it seems to be the route that the official guide is trying to steer us towards. Moving on to minor point number one, the Five Nights at Freddy's games were made by the Rogue indie developer. Here's the thing, FNAF VR opens with this line.
That's why we have recreated many of these completely fictitious scenarios, lies that you've been fed over the last several years, into a hilarious VR game.
It's recreating the lies told to you by the indie developer, and since Help Wanted has direct recreations of FNAFs 1 through 3, it means the games must be part of the fabrications that this developer made up. Also, all of this is heavily implied in the story of the same name, Help Wanted and Tales of the Pizza Plex, hence FNAF 1 through 3 canon games within the lore of the series. Big swing number 2.
Not right now, but later on, I could possibly get Help Wanted and stream playing that too, because that could possibly be fun. And Help Wanted 2, because Help Wanted 2 is coming out. Or it is out.
The elephant, or ghost in the room, Charlie infecting the Pizzaplex. John from the channel FNAF has made some great findings about Charlie's influence over the Pizzaplex. The cables that looked like the striped arms of the puppet, the Nightmarion plushies that you find hidden across the Pizzaplex in weird places, the staff bots with creepy smiles and in your dreams written on the front. All of these things scream puppets. Plus, the puppet mask not having tears in the blob seems to imply that Charlie's spirit exists elsewhere. She is still in play, and she has an important role, especially in Gregory's Post-it room. The doors to the Post-it room in the game's code are called Charlie doors, and inside we see a bunch of lit up nightmare staff bot heads. Suspicious to say the least. The channel ID's Fantasy did a great theory looking at the Post-it notes, concluding that the crying child / Gregory isn't alone in this room, but rather might be communicating with someone. A spirit, Charlie. Charlie's spirit seems to have pulled a poltergeist. Instead of controlling one thing, she's affecting a lot of little details, foundational elements of the Pizzaplex. And this isn't the first time that we've seen this in the franchise either. We've seen spirits communicating with people through physical writing in the survival logbook, so we know that this is an established means of spirit communication within this franchise. And I suspect that to some extent it might be Charlie's influence making Gregory go haywire.
Awaken your kids' creativity. Choose the build to change the sword.
wire. Which brings me then to my final and probably biggest controversy in recent FNAF history, Gregory as Patient 46, the evil robot mastermind. Now, I know when I first came out with this theory a year ago, people were mad. But here's the thing, you don't have to take my evidence points for it anymore. The recent Tales from the Pizzaplex story GGY basically goes and just outright proves it. In GGY, we find out about a boy named Gregory who's getting all the high scores in the Pizzaplex arcade machines. When therapists start to go missing, it's confirmed that GGY is the one that's working to bump him off. And when animatronics start getting corrupted by a mysterious glitch, GGY's letters are found inside the code. He even chooses the code name Dr. Rabbit, for crying out loud. But obviously, by the time of security breach, Gregory is working against Burn Trap, Vanessa, and the animatronics. Why? How? Well, it's not really clear. I tend to believe that something must have happened to cause him to either lose his memory or be reset in some way. Maybe it was Charlie talking to him in his post-it room. Maybe he hit his head. Maybe it was the connection that he made with Mike on stage in Glamrock Freddy. Not exactly sure, and I don't think we have enough clues to solve any of it yet. But it makes sense from a story perspective why he'd start off evil on Afton's side and then switch to trying to destroy him and not knowing who he is in Security Breach. And with that, my friends, I'm wrapping this thing up. Congratulations, we are on page 40. 22,000 words of FNAF, baby. Practically just wrote myself a Tales of the Pizzaplex short story. Have I answered everything? No. Does everything fit cleanly? No. But does it feel like the best and most cohesive narrative for all these characters that addresses most of the evidence we're given? Yeah. For me, honestly, it really does. And let's be honest with ourselves, the DLC will probably come out later this year and prove me completely wrong. Wouldn't be the first time. Then comes the movie, whatever, my descent into madness continues. But regardless, I am so proud of this. This was a massive undertaking, and I'm so proud of our editors who have just destroyed the editing across all 4 of these installments. You guys are the best. Thank you for pushing through on 20+ minute uploads. You are unreal, and your talent is unrivaled. I'm so lucky to work with you guys every single day. And like I mentioned before, keep an eye on the channel for an announcement regarding a talkback live stream with some special guests. Was I right? Was I wrong? I want to hear your feedback. So that one's coming up.
The next one's alive, so I gotta skip. Where is it? Yeah, this one's alive. This one's also alive. I'm gonna skip to this. I don't know. Got a couple more. So, actually, I might just do this one, Doggo, and then end stream. Because you got
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, where today it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. I mean, on one hand, FNAF fans be eating good this month. There's books, there's a teaser for the movie, there's a trailer for Security Breach's Ruin DLC. Heck, there's even a brand new FNAF VR sequel.
Let's see how much time says it. So that's an hour. That's an hour, 2 hours. About 4 hours.
Literally got announced as I'm recording this episode. It is all super exciting stuff. I hope you're prepared to engorge yourself in lore like Chica consuming a pizza. It is literally the year of FNAF, which is fitting since it's 2023 and that's the year of FNAF 3. Also, probably FNAF 6. Honestly, the only thing they're missing from this year is some sort of haunted attraction. But on the—
Didn't he say 2036? Or 2033?
other hand, there is chaos in the wider theorist community. Buried in this landslide of new material are a lot, and I mean a lot, of very significant lore drops that feel unusually explicit for this franchise. Hints to the origins of Henry, revelations about secret AI programs controlling the Pizzaplex, confirmation that Gregory was in fact Patient 46. But here's the thing, no one can actually agree on what it's all trying to say. Everyone recognizes that there's been a lot of very important stuff that's being revealed lately, but every online FNAF theorist that I've seen has taken the clues and wound up with a different solution to the puzzle. And normally that's not a big issue. That is the beauty of theorizing, to reach your own conclusions, to make your own predictions, to come up with your own personal headcanons as part of the internet hive mind's attempts to work together and solve a common mystery. There are gonna be people that you agree with and people that you don't, and you know what? It's great either way. Except this time, we kinda gotta sort of figure it out. What we're talking about today is some major stuff. Everything that's coming out right now feels like it's trying to guide us into what the plot of Security Breach was meant to be. And now with The Ruin coming out in July and building off of that initial game.
Oh, so there's a game coming out in July.
game, we've got a ticking clock demanding that we solve things, and quick. Our window is tight. So today I'm here to catch you up on all the major reveals and the ensuing controversies before throwing my purple hat into the ring on what I suspect it all means. Good news, bad news on today's episode, friends. Good news, I think we've been on the right track the entire time. Bad news, I don't think the wider FNAF community is gonna agree with me. This one is gonna be a battle, so are you ready, theorists? It's time to eat pizza and theorize, and I'm all out of pizza. Okay, first let me catch you up on the big FNAF drama. Let me set the stage. It's April. All of Team Theorist over here has just finished slaving away on our massive timeline for the series. We've done it. We are on the beach, coconut drinks in our hands, eager to take a break from the franchise until Ruin's release later in the year. But nope. Scott had himself some other plans. He smacked those beverages clean out of our hands and released 3 new books: Submechanophobia, The Bobby Dots Conclusion, and Nexi. Now, normally that wouldn't be too much of a concern, right? Books tied to this franchise have been coming out for years. It's just part of the content treadmill at this point, and it's not like they tend to add a whole lot. Only one in like every 6 stories is even remotely lore relevant, and even then the connection back to the games only exists if you squint at it. But oh no, friends, not this time. Across the 3 books, story after story after story seems to have significant lore implications. And not only that, they're also much more direct in the way that
that was a pretty weird ending to that game.
Information is presented, with characters and events mapping largely one for one onto characters and events from the games. If you're not in the habit of reading these things, and let's be honest, why would you when I could just do the homework for you? What I'm talking about might be a bit confusing, so I'm just gonna explain by way of example. In GGY, one of the 4 stories that set the internet on fire, a young boy named Greg, with brown hair and big brown eyes, is a master hacker who's been reprogramming the animatronics at the Pizzaplex for evil deeds, including bumping off 3 school counselors that seem to be getting too close to the truth. He also has himself a habit of being really good at the Pizzaplex's arcade games, leaving behind his initials GGY at the top of the game's leaderboards. Now, compare that information to what we get in the games. There's a young boy named Gregory with brown hair and big brown eyes who seems to be Patient 46, a master hacker that's reprogramming the animatronics at the Pizzaplex for evil deeds, including bumping off 3 therapist characters that also seem to be getting too close to the truth. He also has himself the habit of leaving the letters GGY at the top of the leaderboards at various arcade cabinets throughout the Pizzaplex. Now,
kept clicking it in and out a bit, and I kept seeing that body that you were working on.
That right there, that is not counting animatronic toes and trying to match up striped shirts. That is about as explicit of a one-to-one parallel that you get for this franchise. So when the story also reveals that Greg's nickname is Rab, aka Dr. Rabbit, you stand up and take notice. And you know what? The internet sees it. They recognize the connections and how important the books have suddenly become. No longer am I out there on my own little island shouting into the void about using the books to inform our speculation about the lore. Finally, the internet agrees with me. To me, this is a huge step in the right direction in terms of figuring out the wider lore of the franchise. You know, there's just one teeny tiny little problem.
Yeah, I try to fix the audio, make sure the video is not too loud. But I was saying, oops, I muted the audio by accident. How a few times I popped into looking at the stream, how the body was just like all sorts of mangled up, missing ways. I'm trying to fix this. Yeah, this should be better. Before when I was streaming, you couldn't even hear
with this. No one can quite agree just how seriously to take this lore. After years of denying the book's canonicity, there's suddenly been a massive swing of the pendulum the complete other way, where now many pockets of the FNAF community vehemently believe that these most recent stories are fully canon with the games. In other words, we're no longer talking about an alternate universe where events are similar to the games, but with slight differences. Oh no. Now the debate is all about whether what you read in the books also happened in the Pizzaplex that we play through in the games. So before we dive into that can of worms, let's just talk about the stories themselves. I already filled you in on GGY, which means it's time to talk about the other 3 which tell themselves a connected timeline of events, starting with the first, The Mimic. This is the one that everyone has been losing their collective minds over. This story tells the tale of Edwin, a genius inventor and single father, and his hyperactive son, David. Basically, Edwin is overworked. Years ago, he sold his struggling robotics company to Fazbear Entertainment, who now has him hard at work turning their, quote, weird costumes into entertaining robots. With the first one that he's working on being a bright yellow chick. There's just one problem here, David. David is 4 in all the best and worst ways possible. It means that he's sweet and excitable, but it also means that he's moody and demands a lot of time and attention. 2 things that Edwin does not have. So to fix his problem and get himself more work time, Edwin creates a piece of software known as Mimic 1. Using some spare robot parts, he makes a windless endoskeleton that's able to copy everything that David does. Basically, this thing's an AI that's using David as his training data. And while Mimic 1 starts parts by merely copying David, pretty soon it's able to respond on its own, independently. And David loves this thing, which means that Edwin is finally able to disappear into his work. Everything seems to be going well until tragedy strikes.
Because a couple days ago, last week, you were talking about how Mimic was your favorite character. And I was just hearing about it. Yeah, George, if you want to see that, Sarah's missing game, I'll be doing that on Wednesday,
and is killed.
because I'll be finishing this up tomorrow.
Edwin is devastated, and he takes all his rage out on the Mimic, this robot that continues to behave like his son, infusing the metal of the bot with pure agony. We then flash forward in time to Edwin being gone, and the Mimic roaming the halls of his abandoned home, a brutal killer still in possession of David's childlike tendencies. So, does any of that sound familiar? Cause it should. It's Henry Emily, a genius inventor who helped to create the robots of Fazbear Entertainment, a man who also happens to be a single father whose only child dies in a tragic accident when they decide to run outside, a creator whose first project was Chica. Now, that alone would be plenty of connected dots, but the story continues to hammer home the parallels between these two men. In past videos, I've talked a lot about Henry's signature animatronic design, the hinged jaws that we see on the original animatronics, as well as the Rockstar animatronics. Well, guess what? This is how Edwin decided to build the Mimic. Quote, under the eye housing, Edwin had welded in place a hinged...
I usually stream from about 9 a.m., which I think I might do later from actually 9, because I do like 9:45. But from like 9 a.m. till about 3, maybe later, but I streamed for about
jaw. Speaking of Edwin's robots, do you know what Edwin's first business project was? He made robotic vacuum cleaners.
I usually do it in the morning, mainly because, yeah, dog was always here. I usually do it in the morning because I'm mainly streaming because dog, not a lot of people are joining much.
Ones that we see in FNAF 6, Edwin and Henry even share the same sandy brown hair color. But the other big parallel that the story gives us is when Edwin
too loud at night.
Destroys the Mimic. The way this event is described is very similar to when Henry built the final Charlie bot from the fourth closet novel. Here's how it's described in Tales of the Pizzaplex. He could almost feel his murderous thoughts pouring through his muscles, transfusing through the metal into Mimic systems. And here's what happens when Henry builds the Charlie bot after her death. Quote from that book. When Henry began to make the fourth, his despair turned to rage. He seethed as he soldered her skeleton together, pouring his anger into the forge where he shaped her very bones. It was not Charlotte drenched in grief, it was made alive with Henry's fury. In both instances, we have men who have instilled their creations, animatronics that are literal stand-ins for their dead kids, with the pain and rage of loss. If that's not a solid connection, I don't know what is. Even from a timeline perspective, Edwin being Henry makes a lot of sense. In the Mimic, they specifically call out that he's 24 years old. After the death of his son, he disappears. But then, in another tale from the Pizzaplex, this one called The Storyteller, we meet up with Edwin 40 years later, at the point that he decides to return to the Fazbear franchise to sit on their board of directors. Again, the books make a very specific point to call out all these dates. So why? What's the big deal here? Well, if Edwin is truly the parallel for Henry, Henry lost his daughter.
Alright, sounds good, George. Also, Doggo, I think I'll end stream after this, but I'm gonna start a new one and probably play some games, because I don't know what else to do. Yeah, I'll probably play some horror games. I got a few to play.
Charlie in 1983. We're not exactly sure when he leaves the company, but we definitely know when he comes back, 2023, as evidenced by the numerical code in FNAF 6. 40 years later. A perfect match to the time frame that the books have laid out. In short, Edwin has to be Henry, which means, in a very cool twist, our early franchise timeline was almost perfectly correct. In that video, I said that William Afton's company specialized in...
I recently enjoyed just rereading it, and I get scared kind of quite easy with playing horror games.
Hand-sewn mascot suits, and that Henry, when he was brought in, was the one responsible for turning those suits into animatronics. That prediction right there, that was right on the money. I was also on the right track when I said that one of the two founders had their failing company get bought out. I was just wrong about which one. In that timeline video, I suggested that Afton made Fazbear Entertainment, but eventually ran out of money and had to be bailed out by Henry. But as this story shows, it's actually the other way around. Henry was ultimately the one that was bought out. And in one final parallel between the books and the games, the story actually describes the Fazbear exec that gets Edwin Edwin to sign away his business as Portly, which connects all the way back to the Silver Eyes, where Afton was described in a similar way. Quote, Afton was as robust and lively as Henry was withdrawn and shadowy. He was a hefty man who had the ruddy geniality of a financially shrewd Santa Claus. Okay, cool, so we've got some confirmation on some early parts of the franchise, but what does any of this mean for Security Breach? Well, that's where the second Edwin story comes in, the storyteller. In this one, we rejoin Edwin 40 years later. Because of his importance to the early days of Fazbear Entertainment, he now sits on the board of directors, a fact that does not land too well with the current head of the board, Mr. Burrows. Get it? His name's Burrows because everyone's always connected to rabbits. Anyway, to cut costs at the Pizzaplex, Mr. Burrows decides to lay off the entire creative department, instead replacing them with a generative AI that's capable of creating new storylines for all the characters. Basically, this thing is like ChatGPT on steroids. This, understandably, upsets Edwin, who apparently has gone from engineering nerd to creative heart of the company. But he's not just a WGA member that's upset about some Writers Guild's rights. What makes matters worse is the fact that Mr. Burrows isn't using just any AI, he's installing Mimic 1, the same program that Edwin...
Alright. Thanks for this up, and hope you have a good rest of your day, George.
The one that was trained by his son 40 years prior. When they install it, it even comes in the form of his son's favorite toy, a white tiger head. And here's where things start to get real crazy. This AI controls everything in the Pizzaplex. It runs through a large central tree of wires that are connected through the walls. Even
you can only get Wendy's new saucy nugs
Why is
at
there
Wendy's.
so many Wendy's
so if anyone ever
ads?
tries to tell you they have saucy nugs at home, you might want to see what else they're hiding. Because that person lies.
Stop.
For a whole new way to nug, gotta be Wendy's.
Not getting Wendy's.
Tapping into things like the animatronics themselves. In fact, once the Mimic 1 program gets installed, the behavior of all the animatronics starts to change from their normal personalities into something that's a bit more like a 4-year-old.
It's not even like the actual characters.
They start to become possessive. They get into tug-of-war matches over toys. They sulk in the corner and cry. David is somehow getting infused into everything that this AI touches. Eventually, Edwin attempts to shut the Mimic 1 program down, but he dies in the process. However, in his final moments, he attempts to communicate with his son inside the AI. You see, in the Mimic story, Edwin watches David communicating with his robot buddy using a made-up language described like this. Quote, David and Mimic had been doing all manner of odd little drawings that were surrounded by markings that looked vaguely like hieroglyphics. Edwin then uses this same language to communicate with the Mimic software at the end of the storyteller. Quote again, every sheet of paper was covered with odd stick drawings and strange symbols that were not at all familiar to Mr. Burrows. Squiggles, squares, loops, triangles within triangles. So why is this story such a big deal right now in the FNAF community? Well, everyone knows it's important, it's just that no one can truly settle on what it's trying to say, which means it's time for me to do my best to try and break it all down. Now, I've already mentioned the parallels between Edwin and Henry, but what that also suggests is that Edwin's son David may just be an analog for Henry's only child, Charlie. Not that they're one and the same or following the exact chain of events, but rather that where David goes in the books, we should be looking for Charlie to follow in the games. And in the story, the Mimic 1 AI that was trained using David winds up controlling the Pizzaplex and all its animatronics via an intricate system of wires. This, to me, is the book suggesting that we should probably be looking for Charlie to be doing the same thing in the games. And wouldn't you know it, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest exactly that. Throughout Security Breach, there are wires everywhere. Black and white striped wires that look very similar to everyone's favorite possessed puppet, Charlie. There are also the staff bots roaming around looking like a twisted version of the puppet.
Dude, when I first saw this ending where the animatronics did that ending was crazy.
Nightmare own plushies hidden in strange locations throughout the building, again suggesting that an angry version of Charlie may just be at work within the walls of the building. During my complete timeline, I suggested that the reason we were seeing so much puppet imagery throughout the Pizzaplex is because Charlie's possessing the building poltergeist style. Just like the house in that movie is possessed by angry spirits, the Pizzaplex is haunted by Charlie because it's built on top of the location of the FNAF 6 fire. Basically, her physical form may be gone, but her spirit is still going to haunt the building
on
until
top of
Afton
FNAF
is
6?
destroyed. And again, I think that this latest story confirms that I was close about the what, but not necessarily about the how. Charlie is still very much here, but it's not a haunting, it's technological. And look at this. The wires are even formed in such a way that they look like the trunk and branches of a tree, exactly the way the Mimic's wires are described to run through the Pizzaplex in the book. Just like David's consciousness infected everything in the Pizzaplex during the Tale story, so too is Charlie infecting everything in the Pizzaplex of the games. But that's not all. Remember that in the book, Edwin uses an elaborate code of symbols, sticks, and shapes to communicate with his son inside of the the Pizzaplex. It's designed as an elaborate code of triangles within triangles. That right there, that is the wall code in Security Breach's secret room. Remember that one? If not, here's the abbreviated translation. Break and mend, I built the breath. They hunt now, drawn to life. The storyteller here is giving us a clue that this wall code, these triangles within triangles, they were written by Henry. How? When? Not sure. Honestly, we hadn't even considered him as a possible person to have written this because he was supposed to be dead in the FNAF 6 fire. But if you look at the text with him in mind, the pieces all fit.
How is Henry supposed to be dead in the FNAF 6 fire? I don't think he was there. Unless he... Well, he burnt the building down, but was he in there?
Henry did.
Didn't Henry kill himself with an animatronic?
Build the breath. He was the creator of the animatronics. And in all stories about Henry, we hear about him repurposing old robotic parts. He is breaking and mending them. But midway through, this coded message starts to switch tones. It starts giving instructions. Quote again, dodge, duck, flash, shoot, crawl, run, crush the vile band. Your life, your aim will save those with soul. He's teaching someone their mission. He's giving some robotic AI their instructions, just like Edwin was trying to communicate with the AI in the book. It is their task to save those with soul. But look specifically at the verbs that are written here, especially shoot and flash. This one has to be talking to Gregory. Not only is he the one that's crushing the vile band of the Pizzaplex, all of those actions are things that he performs in the game. He is the only one shooting with the Faz Blaster. He is the only one flashing with the Faz Cam. It seems like Henry, in a last failsafe against Fazbear, may have built a protector using an AI program and spoke to it using his triangle within triangle code. And that protector has to be Gregory. I know, I can't let Robot Gregory go, I get it, but how else do you explain this? No one else is flashing and shooting. And remember, the story GGY confirms to us that Gregory is patient 46, whose secret therapy tapes are played right next to where this code is in the very same room. Everything in this one room is screaming that the message is for Gregory, written in a code that the books tell us is reserved for robot brains. But this then raises two major questions. First, how could I say that Gregory's a robot when we see him in GGY as just a kid at school? And secondly, GGY makes it clear that Gregory is a villain, hacking into the animatronics and using them to kill people.
Apparently, all three of your former therapists have gone missing, or two of them are missing. One of them was found dead. The woman's body was pretty messed up. It looked like it was mangled by machinery.
Gregory's pen name for a large portion of the book is Dr. Rabbit, for crying out loud. If that doesn't scream, oh, by the way, I'm also working for Afton, I don't know what does. He even calls himself the wizard's most favorite apprentice. So how can I say that he's working for Henry when it's very clearly being told to us that he's also working for William? Well, first off, we never actually see confirmation that he's a human in the books. In fact, we largely get the opposite. Gregory is actually...
We never see that he's a robot in the books either.
Described in the book as, quote, an unfamiliar kid who looked a little lost at the start of the school year. So there's no past with this kid, no growing old together with a group of friends. He just appeared out of nowhere one day. What's more, whenever his friends do something
that happens when you move.
Gregory reacts in a very robotic way. He cocks his head and he has a weird pause in his behavior. Is that a lot to go off of? No. But also nothing about him explicitly says that he's necessarily human, or that he's just the reluctant follower of Afton. But obviously the bigger question here is how? How can he be both a protector bot and an agent of Afton at the same time? This is also a question that's raised in the books. If GGY is saying that Gregory and Glitchtrap are in control of the animatronics, but then the storyteller is saying that an AI version of Charlie is controlling the animatronics, who's actually in control here? Both of these stories feel crucial to understanding Security Breach's lore, and yet they seem to contradict each other. So what is going on? Well, for that answer, we actually have to go to the trailer for the new Security Breach DLC, Ruin. In the last few seconds of footage for this new game, we see a glitching techno rabbit, glitching between two colors.
Oh, isn't that entity? Isn't that thing literally just called
entity? This effect is known as chromatic aberration, which is when the lens of a camera is unable to focus the different colors of light into the exact same point. Usually you see this sort of thing with red and blue, sometimes red and green. Purple and green is not usually the natural color combination for this sort of effect, which means that it's trying to tell us something. And this isn't the only time we see it. If you go over to securitybreachtv.com, which has been the go-to location for all online teasers for these games, the website has the steel wool logo down in the corner, glitched again between purple and green. Not only that, they're reverses of each other. Not just reflections, but actually facing in opposite directions. Well, we know that purple is always going to be the villain color. It's evil. That is a given for this franchise. But green, that then, is probably the opposite color, the hero color. color. And while it could represent Elizabeth with her signature green eyes, what I suspect is more likely is that the green is Charlie. The color of the security puppet's eyes, the color of the wristband that she was wearing the night that she died, all green. So within Gregory, and honestly within all of these animatronics, there's a capacity for both good and evil. Glitch Trap is in the code, obviously, he's purple, but there's also a force for good, Charlie, in there as well as green. And what we're playing through is a battle between these two to ultimately decide who wins. That's why the tiger head and the Tales from the Pizzaplex story has two differently colored eyes. It shows two forces at work within the same program. This also explains why throughout the game, the other animatronics are getting corrupted, but why Glamrock Freddy isn't. He's booted in safe mode. The storyteller establishes that all the animatronics are hooked into the computer network that controls the Pizzaplex. By glitching out and then rebooting in safe mode, Glamrock Freddy is separated from that system, as well as any sort of corruption that's happening within it. And just like that, it all became crystal clear. The reason we have two stories telling us about two different sources of control over the animatronics in the Pizzaplex isn't because Scott changed his mind or because Steel Wool didn't get the memo. It's because Ruin is literally going to be a battle for control. The forces of evil, Glitch Trap, versus the forces for good, Charlie. One who wants to kill kids and use their souls to gain eternal life, and another who wants to put it all to rest and protect those who can still be saved. And Gregory is stuck there in the middle, both of them existing inside of him. Like he says himself at the end of the trailer,
"Don't give up on me yet."
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching. And hey, if you want to see more of my live theory crap...
No. Okay. Stop it. I'm not tired. I got 13 videos from our doggo. Which, yeah, let me real quick check. That's an hour. That's an hour. This is an hour. This is an hour. Yeah. So we got about 4 hours. Tomorrow. Do you have work tomorrow, doggo? At 12? Because if you do, we'll have to start like at 9. I'll check. Let me get there. Okay. You can either let me know in the let me know in the Discord tonight then, because that'll help. Let me know, because if you don't, I'll just stream at the normal time. Yeah, but if you have work tomorrow, I'm gonna start the stream like at 9. So then we could probably finish this stream up by the time you get to work, or before you get to work, hopefully. So else is happening. There's anything I need to skip. I can skip something else. Alright. Yep. Hope you at least enjoy a little bit. I'll see you tomorrow. Or nah, you'll probably be at work. But see you tomorrow then, doggo. I'm gonna be streaming for a little bit longer. Ow! I hurt myself. I mean, I don't know what I'm gonna stream yet. I might play horror games. I might do something else. I'm not completely sure yet. You don't know about tomorrow? Because I started another channel, which is just other stuff. So, doggo, this channel is mainly just gonna be horror games from now on. And this channel I made, oops, let me go to the studios. No, you're Wendy's, I think.
God, these are amazing.
Pause. This channel I made, not that one, on regular, is gonna be just whatever I want to post really. But this one's mainly gonna be horror from now on. Yeah, Wednesday, be Sarah's missing, but yeah. Hope you liked the stream, and I'm gonna end it here. See you, doggo.